Hidden across the rugged landscapes of Turkey are ancient structures that defy explanation. Monuments so massive, so precise, they seem impossible for humans to have built. Colossal stones, intricate carvings, and underground labyrinths whisper of a forgotten knowledge lost to time. How were these marvels created, and what truths lie buried beneath centuries of mystery? Join us as we uncover 3 hours of discoveries that challenge everything we thought we knew. Nestled in the heart of modern-day Turkey, the ancient city of Gordion emerges from the plains like a whisper from a distant past. Its landscape is marked by rolling hills, the silent sweep of the Sakarya River, and the scattered remnants of monumental earthworks, imposing burial mounds that rise above the fields like watchful sentinels. The most famous of these, the Great Tumulus, stretches over 300 feet across its base and towers nearly 70 feet high, a testament to the ambitions of a civilization that flourished more than 2,500 years ago. Its sheer size invites awe, but it also raises profound questions. How were these enormous structures constructed, and what secrets might they conceal within their layered interior? Archaeologists date Gordion's earliest settlement to the early Bronze Age, yet it is most renowned as the capital of the ancient Phrygians, a people whose influence spanned much of central Anatolia. Around 800 to 700 BC, under the legendary King Midas, Gordion is said to have reached its zenith. Excavations reveal a sophisticated urban plan, streets arranged with intention, timber-framed homes, and an intricate network of storage spaces. Artifacts recovered from tombs, intricately carved wooden furniture, bronze vessels, and jewelry, speak to a society with remarkable craftsmanship and far-reaching trade connections. These objects, though tangible, hint at the immaterial, the cultural and spiritual life of a city now reduced to earth and stone. Among the most enigmatic features of Gordion are its tombs. The Great Tumulus, long associated in legend with King Midas, contained no human remains when first opened by archaeologists, only traces of burnt wood and broken ceramics. Inside, the inner chamber is precisely constructed, a perfect circle of stone, yet the tools available to the Phrygians could hardly account for the exactitude achieved. Could this reflect a level of engineering knowledge lost to history, or techniques that have simply been forgotten? And if so, how did a civilization operating thousands of years ago manipulate such heavy stones and timber with such precision? These questions linger like shadows over the archaeological record, defying definitive explanation. Beyond the Great Tumulus, the smaller burial mounds scattered around Gordion present their own mysteries. Some reveal objects that are strikingly advanced in design and execution for the period, suggesting influences from distant lands, yet no records survive to explain these connections fully. Even the famous Gordian knot, long considered a metaphor for seemingly insoluble problems, hints at symbolic and possibly ritualistic practices that remain poorly understood. Was the knot simply a clever device, or did it represent a deeper philosophical or spiritual idea, known only to those who once walked these streets? The city itself, reconstructed in part through careful excavation, shows evidence of frequent rebuilding, fires, and eventual abandonment. Layers of ash and rubble hint at conflict, yet much of Gordion's demise remains obscured. Could external invasions have played a role, or were environmental and economic pressures the silent architects of its decline? Archaeologists continue to debate these questions, but the absence of definitive answers adds to the site's aura. Every stone turned, every artifact catalogued seems to deepen the enigma rather than resolve it. Modern visitors to Gordion encounter not just ruins, but a landscape imbued with time itself. The plains stretch endlessly, dotted with mounds that mark the ambitions of a civilization both familiar and foreign. Standing among these ancient stones, one cannot help but wonder what knowledge, rituals, or technologies have vanished with the Phrygians. And as we trace the faint lines of streets and chambers through archaeological records, we are reminded that the story of Gordion is far from complete. What lies beneath the soil may forever elude us, yet it continues to inspire a search that is as much about understanding ourselves as it is about uncovering the past. Continuing from the plains of central Anatolia and the silent earth mounds of Gordion, the journey shifts southwest, where the landscape begins to change. The dry inland winds soften as they approach the Mediterranean, and the terrain folds into rugged hills and deep valleys carved by time and water. Here, overlooking the Xanthos Valley in modern-day Turkey, rises another ancient presence, one that feels less like a city and more like something anchored into the cliffs themselves. Perched dramatically on a steep limestone outcrop is Tlos, one of the oldest and most enduring settlements of ancient Lycia. Unlike the buried secrets of Gordion, Tlos is not hidden beneath the earth. It is exposed, elevated, and carved directly into the living rock. From a distance, its acropolis appears almost suspended above the valley floor, as if placed there deliberately to watch over the land rather than simply inhabit it. Archaeological evidence suggests continuous occupation of Tlos for thousands of years, stretching back to at least the 2nd millennium BC. It later became an important Lycian city and eventually came under Roman influence, absorbing layers of culture that remain visible in its architecture. Roman baths, a stadium, an agora, and a well-preserved theater still cling to the hillside, their stone seats angled toward a horizon that has not changed since antiquity. Yet even with these familiar Roman imprints, something about Tlos resists full explanation. The most striking features are not the civic structures, but the rock-cut tombs that dominate the cliffs above the city. Facades carved directly into the vertical stone face resemble temple fronts, columns, pediments, and doorways that lead not into chambers of stone masonry, but into darkness hollowed from the rock itself. These Lycian tombs are often associated with elite burials, yet their scale and precision raise quiet questions. How were these high, inaccessible surfaces worked so carefully without modern scaffolding or tools capable of such control? And more intriguingly, why invest such immense effort into creating tombs that mimic houses or temples, as if the dead were meant to continue living in architectural memory? Mainstream archaeology interprets these structures as expressions of Lycian funerary belief, tombs designed to represent eternal dwellings for the elite, reflecting a worldview in which death was a transition rather than an end. The elevated placement may symbolize proximity to the divine or separation from the world of the living. Yet, when standing beneath these cliffside facades, another impression emerges. Not just symbolism, but intention that feels almost engineered, as though the landscape itself was being transformed into a coded language of stone. At ground level, the city reveals another layer of complexity. The stadium stretches along the slope in a long, narrow basin, its seating still partially intact. Nearby, the Roman baths show sophisticated engineering, vaulted chambers, heating systems, and water channels that once carried thermal energy through the structure. These are familiar elements of Roman provincial architecture, yet their integration into such a steep and uneven terrain required adaptation that seems almost improbable in its precision. How did ancient builders maintain structural stability in a city built on fractured rock and vertical gradients? As excavation and study continue, Tlos presents a pattern seen in other ancient Lycian cities, a blending of indigenous tradition with external influence. Yet the origin of certain architectural choices remains elusive. The Lycian rock-cut tombs, for instance, appear abruptly in the archaeological record with a fully formed style, as if the technique arrived complete rather than evolving gradually. Was this the result of lost experimental phases that left no trace, or did knowledge travel from elsewhere, carried through trade routes that have since faded from historical memory? Some fringe interpretations suggest that the precision and scale of these cliff tombs imply techniques that exceed what is typically assumed for the period. Others propose symbolic or astronomical alignments embedded within their placement, though evidence remains fragmentary and debated. While these ideas sit outside mainstream consensus, their persistence highlights an enduring uncertainty, the sense that we are seeing only part of a larger system of meaning, one no longer fully legible. Even the relationship between the city and its surrounding landscape invites reflection. Tlos does not sit passively within the valley, it dominates it visually. From the Acropolis, the entire Xanthos basin unfolds like a map. Rivers trace silver lines through fertile land, and distant peaks frame the horizon. Was this positioning purely strategic, chosen for defense and visibility? Or did it also carry symbolic weight, an assertion of presence, control, or perhaps connection to something beyond the visible world? And yet, despite centuries of study, many aspects of Tlos remain unresolved. Layers of rebuilding suggest a city repeatedly reshaped by time, disaster, and cultural transformation. Earthquakes likely altered its form more than once, yet the inhabitants always returned, rebuilding rather than abandoning. What sustained this attachment to a place so exposed to both natural forces and shifting empires? Today, visitors walk among the ruins with the valley wind moving through broken columns and silent stone seats. The tombs still watch from above, their carved facades weathered but intact, as if waiting for a language that can once again explain them. And standing there, beneath the cliffs of Tlos, one question persists without resolution. How much of this city do we truly understand? And how much remains hidden not in the stone itself, but in the knowledge of those who built it? As the journey leaves behind the cliff-carved silence of Tlos, the narrative shifts once more, away from mountains etched with Lycian tombs, and toward water, stillness, and reflection. The road north leads into northwestern Anatolia, where the landscape softens into low hills and fertile plains. And there, resting quietly beneath the surface of a vast freshwater expanse, lies a discovery that seems almost impossible at first glance. In the calm waters of Iznik Lake, something ancient sleeps. It was not always known to exist. For centuries, the lake appeared unremarkable in the historical imagination, its surface shifting with wind and light, its depths assumed to hold little more than sediment and forgotten debris. But aerial imagery in the early 21st century revealed something unexpected, a faint, geometric outline beneath the water, as if the lake itself was preserving the ghost of a structure long erased from the land. When divers finally descended, breaking through layers of cold fresh water and silence, they found it, a basilica. Not intact in the way stone monuments stand against time, but preserved in outline and ruin. Walls collapsed yet still traceable, foundations still aligned, apses still visible beneath the rippling distortion of water. This submerged structure, often referred to as the sunken Basilica of St. Neophytos, rests just a few meters below the lake's surface, as if it had simply chosen to sink rather than disappear. And immediately, the questions began. How does an entire place of worship end up beneath a lake that has existed in its current form for centuries? Mainstream archaeology offers a measured explanation. The basilica is believed to date back to the early Byzantine period, likely constructed in the 4th or 5th century BC, when Christianity was still taking root across the Eastern Roman world. Earthquakes, common in this region of Anatolia, are the most widely accepted cause of its submersion. A seismic event could have destabilized the shoreline, shifting the ground and allowing the lake to slowly reclaim the structure. A natural disaster, a slow sinking, a forgotten shoreline. Yet even this explanation, while plausible, leaves behind an unsettling sense of incompleteness. Because the basilica is not simply destroyed, It is preserved in a way that feels deliberate, almost curated by time itself. The stone foundations remain remarkably coherent. The layout is still readable, a central nave, flanked by side aisles, leading toward a semicircular apse that once faced the rising light of morning prayers. Even fragments of columns appear to stand in place, as if waiting for the return of those who once walked between them. And so another question emerges. What kind of event preserves without fully erasing? Local tradition adds another layer to the mystery. Some accounts speak of a church dedicated to early Christian martyrs, including Saint Neophytos, whose devotion was said to be so profound that miracles surrounded his memory. Over time, stories evolved, as they often do, blending reverence with symbolism. Could the Basilica have been more than a place of worship? Could it have been a site chosen for its spiritual significance, later lost beneath shifting geological forces? Then there is the lake itself. Iznik Lake is not a static body of water. Geological studies indicate fluctuating water levels across centuries, shaped by climatic variation, sediment shifts, and tectonic activity. Some researchers suggest that what is now submerged may once have been shoreline architecture, gradually overtaken as water levels rose over time, rather than through a single catastrophic event. A slow disappearance, rather than a sudden fall. But even this theory raises new uncertainties. Why was the basilica built so close to a shoreline that appears to have been unstable? Was the landscape already changing during its construction? Or did its builders deliberately choose a liminal space, where land and water meet, where the boundary between the physical and the symbolic becomes thin? And here, the narrative begins to drift into more speculative waters. Some fringe interpretations propose that the basilica's placement may have held ritual or cosmological meaning beyond conventional religious practice. Water, in many ancient traditions, represents transition, memory, and passage. A submerged sanctuary might symbolize not abandonment, but transformation, an intentional merging of sacred architecture with the natural world. Others have wondered whether the structure was once part of a larger, now lost settlement, its other buildings erased completely while only this section remains visible due to unique geological conditions beneath the lakebed. Could there be additional ruins still hidden deeper below, untouched because they lie beyond the reach of modern diving surveys? And then there are quieter, more hesitant questions, those that archaeologists rarely voice openly, but sometimes consider in private discussions. Why does the basilica feel so precisely preserved in its layout, as if it was not destroyed in chaos, but gently lowered into permanence? Why do certain structures seem to survive in fragments that suggest intention rather than accident? No evidence confirms such ideas. But the lake offers no contradictions either. It simply holds what it has taken. Today, when divers descend into the basilica's remains, they move through a space that feels suspended between worlds. Sunlight fractures above them, filtering through water in shifting patterns that illuminate stone outlines like faded ink on parchment. Fish drift through what was once sacred space. Silence replaces liturgy. And yet, the geometry of human intention remains unmistakable. A place of gathering, a place of belief, a place now rewritten by water. Standing at the edge of interpretation, one final question lingers, more atmospheric than answerable. Was this basilica lost to the lake? Or has it been patiently preserved by it, waiting for centuries beneath the surface, holding its silence until someone finally looked closely enough to see it again? From the still waters of Iznik Lake, where stone lies submerged beneath centuries of silence, the journey turns once again inland, away from reflections distorted by water and back toward a landscape shaped by wind, rock, and time itself. The terrain begins to rise gently, then more decisively, unfolding into a vast interior plateau of western Anatolia. Here, the earth no longer conceals its history beneath lakes or cliffs alone. Instead, it exposes it openly, etched into stone, carved into valleys, and scattered across an expanse that feels less like a single place and more like a fragmented memory of an ancient world. This is the Phrygian Valley. At first glance, it appears almost austere. Rolling volcanic tuff formations stretch across the landscape, their surfaces softened by erosion yet shaped into uncanny forms. Pillars, towers, and monolithic walls that resemble architecture but are entirely natural in origin. And yet, this natural canvas was not left untouched. It was carved, altered, and inhabited by one of antiquity's most enigmatic civilizations, the Phrygians. Centuries ago, this region formed the heartland of the Phrygian kingdom, a culture that rose to prominence in the early 1st millennium BC. Their capital, Gordion, once stood as a political and symbolic center of power, tied forever to legends of kings, knots, and fate itself. But beyond the well-documented capital lies a broader landscape, one that seems less governed by centralized design and more by dispersed intention. The Phrygian Valley is not defined by a single monument. It is defined by repetition. Rock-cut facades appear suddenly along cliff faces, temple-like structures carved directly into stone, their entrances framed with geometric precision. Some resemble small sanctuaries. Others take on the appearance of monumental tombs, their symmetry suggesting ritual importance. And yet, many remain empty, or at least offer no clear indication of what once lay within them. Why carve such elaborate structures into stone that offers no obvious defensive advantage, no strategic visibility, no immediate practical use? Mainstream archaeology interprets these sites primarily as funerary and religious spaces. The Phrygians are known to have placed strong emphasis on ancestor worship and ritual commemoration. The monumental tombs scattered across the valley, often referred to as tumuli when above ground, suggest a culture deeply invested in the continuity between life and death, memory and identity. But the valley itself complicates simple interpretations, because here the architecture does not cluster, it disperses. Across kilometers of terrain, isolated carvings appear like markers, silent, deliberate, and often disconnected from any visible settlement. Some are positioned in locations that seem unnecessarily remote, requiring difficult climbs or long traverses through uneven ground. Others are partially hidden within rock formations, their entrances facing directions that do not clearly align with sunlight, pathways, or settlements. This raises a quiet but persistent question. Were these sites meant to be seen, or were they meant to be found only by those who already knew where to look? The geological composition of the valley adds another layer to its mystery. The soft volcanic tuff allowed ancient artisans to carve with relative ease, but it also erodes over time, meaning that what survives today is only a fraction of what once existed. Entire facades may have collapsed, buried under sediment or worn away by centuries of wind and rain. What then has been lost? And more importantly, what patterns might have once emerged from structures now partially erased? Some researchers suggest that the Phrygian Valley may have functioned not simply as a collection of tombs and sanctuaries, but as a broader ritual landscape, an interconnected system of sacred geography. In this interpretation, the carvings are not isolated monuments, but points within a larger conceptual map, perhaps aligned with seasonal cycles, ancestral narratives, or celestial observations. There is no definitive proof of such alignment, but the recurrence of specific architectural motifs, triangular pediments, stylized geometric reliefs, and symbolic patterns suggests a shared visual language that extended across great distances within the valley. And yet, interpretation becomes more complicated when considering the human presence that once animated this landscape. Unlike urban centers, There is little evidence here of dense population clusters. Instead, habitation appears scattered, intermittent, almost hesitant in its permanence. Archaeological traces indicate seasonal occupation in some areas, suggesting that parts of the valley may have been used cyclically rather than continuously. Was this a landscape of permanent settlement, or a space entered and exited according to ritual necessity? And what might that imply about how the Phrygians understood land itself, not as territory to be controlled, but as something more fluid, more symbolic, more responsive? Local traditions, passed down through generations, add further texture to the mystery. Some stories speak of hidden passages beneath the rock formations, natural or carved, that were believed to connect distant points across the valley. Others suggest that certain carved structures were not tombs at all, but markers of knowledge, places where teachings, stories, or sacred laws were preserved in symbolic form. Archaeology remains cautious toward such interpretations. No verified underground network has been discovered, and no inscriptions have been found that explicitly confirm such functions. Yet the absence of evidence does not entirely dissolve the persistence of these ideas in local memory. And so the valley remains suspended between explanation and imagination. Even the famous legacy of Gordion casts a long interpretive shadow over the region. The myth of the Gordian knot, an object tied to destiny, leadership, and decisive action, suggests a culture comfortable with symbolic complexity, where meaning could be layered, obscured, or deliberately constructed to resist straightforward interpretation. Could the broader landscape of Phrygia have functioned in a similar way? Not as a puzzle with a single solution, but as a network of meanings, each site contributing a fragment of a larger, partially hidden narrative. Modern surveys continue to map the valley, documenting carvings, cataloging erosion patterns, and attempting to reconstruct what has been lost. But every new discovery seems to introduce not closure, but further branching questions. A newly identified relief leads to speculation about a missing counterpart. A partially collapsed tomb suggests the possibility of undiscovered chambers. A solitary facade raises the possibility of an entire settlement now erased. The valley does not resolve into clarity. It expands into ambiguity, and as the light shifts across the stone surfaces, casting long shadows that reshape the carvings hour by hour, the impression grows stronger that this is not a static archaeological site, but a living archive of absence. A place where what remains is only part of what once was, and where meaning may still be distributed across distances yet unmeasured. Standing among these formations, one final question lingers in the silence between wind and stone. Was the Phrygian Valley ever meant to be fully understood? Or was it designed, intentionally or not, to ensure that understanding would always remain just beyond reach? From the silent stones of the Phrygian Valley, where ancient hands carved meaning into cliff faces and scattered monuments linger like fragments of a half-forgotten story, the journey winds southward toward the rugged Taurus Mountains. Here, the terrain shifts dramatically. Steep valleys, narrow passes, and olive-scented hills give way to sudden cliffs that plunge toward hidden rivers. And within this dramatic landscape lies a city that seems at once familiar and strangely removed from the currents of time. Sidyma. At first glance, Sidyma is almost ethereal in its isolation. The road to the site winds through narrow gorges, flanked by sheer limestone walls that glow golden in the afternoon sun. The air carries a faint hum of insects and the rustle of leaves, yet within the ruins themselves, a profound silence dominates. It is a quiet that seems alive, as if the stones themselves remember the footsteps, prayers, and conversations of those who once called this city home. Sidyma's origins stretch deep into antiquity. Archaeological evidence suggests that it was inhabited at least as early as the Hellenistic period, with foundations that may date back even further, into the earlier Lycian era. The city's location was strategic yet secretive. Perched in a fertile but secluded valley, it could sustain life while remaining largely insulated from outside powers. One can imagine its inhabitants thriving, yet always aware of the mountain's natural defenses and the isolation they imposed. Walking among the ruins, the city reveals itself slowly, almost cautiously. The main street, paved with worn stones, rises gently toward a forum that is remarkably intact in its proportions. Colonnades, once vibrant and commanding, now stand in muted gray and ochre, their fractured columns bearing witness to centuries of wind and earthquake. Yet despite their ruin, a kind of architectural harmony remains, suggesting that the builders had a precise vision, a sense of order imposed upon the rugged natural landscape. One of Sidyma's most remarkable features is its necropolis, scattered along the hillside surrounding the main city. Rock-cut tombs, carefully carved sarcophagi, and subterranean chambers hint at a culture deeply invested in the afterlife, in memory, and in preserving status beyond death. Some tombs bear inscriptions in Greek, detailing names and lineages, yet many others remain anonymous, their symbolism cryptic, their intent uncertain. Why are some tombs so elaborately decorated while others remain austere, almost hidden within the rock? Was this a reflection of social hierarchy, spiritual belief, or something else entirely? The city's theater, carved into a gentle slope overlooking the valley, adds another layer of intrigue. Its seating, though partially eroded, remains surprisingly intact, offering a sweeping view not only of the stage, but of the surrounding landscape. One can imagine performances where drama, ritual, and civic life intertwined, yet the setting also prompts questions. Why would such a city, modest in size, invest in a structure designed for hundreds of spectators? Was it an indicator of wealth, an attempt to project civic pride, or a marker of cultural significance beyond what the ruins themselves reveal? Water, always essential in human settlement, also plays a mysterious role here. Sidyma is connected to a network of aqueducts and cisterns, some carved directly into the rock. These systems demonstrate remarkable engineering skill, yet their full extent remains partially unexplored. Could there be hidden reservoirs or channels, lost beneath centuries of erosion and overgrowth, still holding secrets of the city's infrastructure and the daily life of its inhabitants? Beyond these tangible structures, Sidyma possesses a subtler, almost intangible mystery, its sense of isolation. Unlike cities in the coastal Lycian trade network, which were bustling with commerce and interaction, Sidyma seems almost self-contained. Scholars speculate that this isolation allowed the city to preserve unique customs and architectural styles, yet it also raises questions about its interactions with neighbors. Did Sidyma engage in clandestine trade, exchanging goods and ideas along hidden routes? Were its cultural influences primarily local, or did they reflect connections to more distant centers in Anatolia and the eastern Mediterranean, including, occasionally, regions as far as Palestine? Even in the most carefully studied areas, unexpected anomalies continue to appear. Archaeologists have documented unusual carvings and reliefs that do not match standard Lycian or Hellenistic motifs, suggesting influences, or perhaps artisans, from elsewhere. Some tombs contain artifacts whose origins are difficult to trace, raising possibilities that Sidyma may have served as a waypoint, a crossroads of cultures, or even a repository of knowledge and objects whose provenance has been lost to time. The city's placement itself carries symbolic weight. Nestled among valleys and peaks, the ruins suggest a deliberate interaction with the surrounding landscape. Certain tombs and structures align with natural features, cliff faces, and distant ridgelines, prompting speculation about ritual or cosmological planning. Could the positioning of buildings have been intended to mark seasonal changes, sacred directions, or astronomical events? While there is no direct evidence, the possibility hints at a civilization that perceived its environment not merely as a backdrop, but as an integral part of spiritual and civic life. Walking through Sidyma today, one cannot ignore the layers of narrative that the city embodies. It is at once concrete, columns, streets, tombs, and ephemeral, memories preserved only in silence, in shadows cast by stones, in the interplay between light and landscape. Every discovery, every excavation, seems to raise new questions rather than resolve old ones. Why did the city eventually decline and fall silent? Were external pressures responsible, conflict, earthquake, shifting trade routes, or did internal dynamics contribute to its abandonment? And what of the objects, inscriptions, and spaces yet unstudied, quietly keeping their stories beneath soil and ruin? Sidyma is a reminder that not all mysteries demand dramatic revelation. Sometimes the most compelling enigmas reside in the quiet persistence of absence, the things that are missing, the traces of culture and ritual that resist full understanding, and the silent dialogue between humanity and landscape. Its isolation, its tombs, and its architectural subtleties suggest a civilization attuned to both its immediate environment and the broader currents of human interaction, yet careful to guard some of its secrets from casual observation. And so, as the afternoon sun shifts across the limestone cliffs, illuminating the city's ruins with a shifting mosaic of light and shadow, one is left with a singular, lingering question. What lies still hidden within Sidyma, waiting to be uncovered, not just in stone and artifact, but in the stories, beliefs, and knowledge that have survived only as echoes? Could there be chambers yet unexplored, inscriptions yet unread, or connections to other civilizations yet unrecognized? In Sidyma, as in the Phrygian Valley, the past remains partially veiled. It beckons to those willing to move slowly, to observe carefully, and to accept that some mysteries endure not because they are impossible to solve, but because they are meant to endure, silent, patient, and quietly challenging us to continue the search. From the quiet stones of Sidyma, where streets wind through a city long silent and tombs whisper of lives once lived, the journey moves northward into the heart of Anatolia's plateau. Here, the landscape changes once again. Low rolling hills give way to sudden outcrops of rock, scattered like the ruins of a primeval world, and the air carries a weight, as if it remembers the footsteps of generations long gone. Amid this austere terrain lies a place of profound mystery and silent authority, Yazılıkaya. At first sight, Yazılıkaya appears deceptively simple. A natural rock formation rises abruptly from the surrounding plain, its surfaces worn smooth by millennia of wind and rain. Yet upon closer inspection, the rocks reveal themselves to be far more than natural monuments. They are a carefully curated canvas, etched with the faces and symbols of a civilization whose power and belief continue to intrigue scholars today. Yazılıkaya served as an open-air sanctuary of the Hittite civilization, flourishing in the late 2nd millennium BC. The Hittites, known for their sophisticated administration, complex legal systems, and far-reaching influence across Anatolia and beyond, chose this site not for strategic advantage, but for ritual significance. The sanctuary consists of two main chambers, often referred to as Chamber A and Chamber B, each lined with carved reliefs depicting gods, semi-divine beings, and sacred animals. Unlike enclosed temples, the open-air nature of Yazılıkaya connects human presence directly to the sky, to the passage of light, and to the natural world surrounding it. Walking among the rock reliefs, one is immediately struck by the precision and scale of the carvings. The figures, though weathered, convey a dynamic sense of motion and ceremony. Gods and goddesses are depicted with symbolic attributes, sun discs, winged figures, and ritual staffs, their gestures both formal and expressive. Scholars interpret these carvings as representations of Hittite religious cosmology, yet the precise meaning of many symbols remains debated. Was this a calendar of divine authority, a visual recounting of myth, or a map of celestial observation encoded in stone? Chamber A, the larger of the two, presents a procession of figures that ascend along the rock in a deliberate, almost choreographed manner. Some scholars suggest these represent the Hittite pantheon arranged hierarchically, with the supreme gods at the center and lesser deities flanking them. Others note possible astronomical alignments, proposing that certain figures correspond to constellations or solar events. While no evidence definitively confirms these interpretations, the consistency and repetition of patterns suggest intentional design rather than random or decorative choice. Chamber B, smaller yet equally compelling, contains reliefs that are darker in tone, sometimes described as more intimate. Here, one encounters depictions of mortals in reverent poses, offering gifts or performing ritual gestures before divine figures. These scenes invite speculation about the role of human agency in Hittite religion. Were these images meant to instruct, to commemorate, or to channel power? And if so, how might they have functioned within the larger sanctuary, part of a ritual landscape, a performance of devotion, or a symbolic narrative carved into the living stone? One of the most enigmatic aspects of Yazılıkaya is its relationship to light and shadow. As the sun traverses the sky, its rays illuminate different figures at different times of the year. Some researchers have noted that during solstices, specific reliefs are highlighted, while others remain cloaked in shadow. Was this alignment intentional, serving as a temporal marker for ritual activities? Or is it a natural coincidence amplified by human perception? The answer remains tantalizingly elusive. Beyond the carvings themselves, the sanctuary's location adds to its mystery. Yazılıkaya sits within proximity to the Hittite capital of Hattusa, yet it is removed enough to feel secluded, almost hidden in plain sight. The choice of site suggests that the Hittites sought a liminal space, one that bridges the mundane world and the divine. The valley surrounding the rock formation contains traces of pathways and altars, hinting at gatherings, processions, and ceremonies whose full scope has yet to be uncovered. Could hidden chambers or unexcavated features still lie buried beneath centuries of sediment, waiting to reveal more of the ritual practices once performed here? Even the iconography invites speculation beyond conventional scholarship. Certain figures combine attributes in ways not directly paralleled in other Hittite sites. Hybrid animals, composite deities, and figures with unexplained symbolism suggest either localized religious variation or the preservation of older traditions whose origins have been lost. Might these carvings encode knowledge of mythic cycles, cosmological order, or ceremonial secrets inaccessible to outsiders? Yazılıkaya's enduring mystery also lies in its silence. Unlike a city or fortress, there are no inscriptions detailing rulers, decrees, or civic records. What survives is purely symbolic, nonverbal, and open to interpretation. This absence of textual explanation forces modern observers to confront the sanctuary on its own terms, through pattern, geometry, and relationship to the natural world, rather than through the conventional lens of historical record. The surrounding landscape reinforces this sense of deliberate seclusion. Forested hills, winding valleys, and distant ridges frame the sanctuary in a way that isolates it from immediate observation, yet offers commanding vistas. Could the placement itself have been part of the ritual experience, an intentional interplay between human perception, geography, and sacred narrative? Did the Hittites intend for these carvings to be seen by many, or only by those who undertook the journey into the valley with knowledge of its hidden paths? Modern archaeology continues to probe these questions. Surveys, 3D scans, and comparative studies with other Hittite sites reveal both consistencies and anomalies. Some features echo patterns found at Hattusa, while others appear unique to Yazılıkaya. The sanctuary's combination of openness, precision, and symbolic complexity ensures that every study uncovers more questions than answers, drawing researchers into a careful dance between evidence and interpretation. Standing before the carved rocks today, one is struck by the duality of permanence and impermanence. The figures are immovable, frozen into stone for over 3 millennia. Yet the meanings remain fluid, shifting with light, perspective, and scholarly lens. Yazılıkaya is at once concrete and ephemeral, an enduring testament to Hittite devotion, and a canvas for ongoing inquiry. As the sun dips behind the Anatolian hills, shadows stretching across the rock faces, one cannot help but wonder, what more remains hidden in Yazılıkaya? Are there carvings still undiscovered, or symbolic alignments that have yet to be understood? Could there be elements of Hittite ritual, astronomy, or cosmology encoded in the sanctuary that await revelation? Here, in this open-air temple, the past speaks softly, through carvings, through silence, and through the patient interaction of human and natural time. It is a place that demands attention, contemplation, and humility. And perhaps most hauntingly of all, it reminds us that some mysteries endure not because they are inaccessible, but because they are meant to inspire reflection, inviting us to continue searching, wondering, and asking questions that may never find definitive answers. From the sacred carvings of Yazılıkaya, where gods and mortals intertwine in the open-air rock, the journey shifts once more, this time southward toward the fertile plains of western Anatolia, where the river valleys meet the rising hills. Here, the landscape is marked not only by natural beauty, but by a peculiar aura. Fields, stone ruins, and pathways that hint at civilizations both grand and secretive. And among these rolling hills lies a city whose shadows seem to linger long after its people have departed. Aizanoi. At first glance, Aizanoi appears as a typical Roman settlement in Anatolia. Columns, temple ruins, and a forum that once buzzed with civic life. Yet beneath this seemingly ordinary facade lies a darker, more enigmatic layer, the city's ancient tombs. Long whispered about in local tradition as cursed, these sepulchres stand as monuments to lives, deaths, and perhaps destinies that remain only partially understood. Walking among the ruins, one cannot ignore the peculiarity of the tomb's placement. Unlike ordinary burial grounds that cluster near city limits, Aizanoi's tombs occupy commanding positions along hillsides, overlooking valleys and distant rivers. Their sheer size and careful construction suggest they were intended to impress, or perhaps intimidate. Massive stone blocks, elaborately carved facades, and inscriptions that survive in fragments all hint at a culture acutely aware of mortality, power, and legacy. Archaeologists date many of these tombs to the Roman period, roughly the 1st centuries A.D., though some foundations may rest on earlier Hellenistic or even Phrygian layers. The tomb's design is unusually consistent: rectangular chambers, vaulted ceilings, and occasionally multiple burial niches, often accompanied by reliefs depicting mythological scenes or funerary rituals. The craftsmanship is undeniable, yet their positioning and occasional inscriptions give pause. Many of the epitaphs warn of divine retribution for those who disturb the resting place, phrases invoking gods, curses, and omens that survive in partially eroded Latin or Greek. This is where the mystery deepens. Were these inscriptions merely symbolic, a customary formality in Roman funerary practice? Or did the ancients genuinely believe in the potency of these curses, in the ability of words etched into stone to extend influence beyond death? Archaeologists and historians debate this endlessly, for while similar inscriptions exist elsewhere in the Roman world, the density and consistency of such warnings at Aizanoi is unusual. Walking among the tombs, one notices another strange feature. Some chambers are partially hidden or difficult to access, nestled against cliff edges or behind natural formations. it is as if their builders deliberately sought to obscure them, not out of modesty, but perhaps out of reverence, fear, or secrecy. Could these hidden tombs have been intended for elite individuals, or perhaps for those associated with ritual functions now lost to time? And if secrecy was indeed a factor, what knowledge or power were these individuals thought to possess that required protection even in death? Mainstream explanations suggest these features were largely pragmatic. The tombs were designed to maximize visibility, control access, or resist looters. Yet, as one surveys the site today, a sense of intentional symbolism emerges. Alignments, for example, appear more than coincidental. Some tombs face the rising sun on solstices, while others are oriented toward distant peaks, suggesting that the dead were placed in relation not only to the living city, but to celestial and geological markers. Did the ancients believe that such alignments enhanced the potency of their curses, or ensured a form of cosmic justice that would extend beyond the immediate physical world? Local folklore adds yet another layer. For centuries, villagers spoke of tombs where misfortune seemed to follow those who trespassed or disturbed the stones. While skeptics attribute these tales to superstition, it is undeniable that Aizanoi's tombs exude a palpable presence. Even in daylight, shadows fall in ways that exaggerate the scale and form of the tombs. Wind through the valley produces faint sounds that mimic whispering, and the slight shifts of sunlight across carved reliefs create fleeting impressions of movement. Could the ancients have intentionally exploited natural phenomena to reinforce the power of their sepulchres, blending architecture, landscape, and psychology into a single experience? Beyond folklore, certain anomalies continue to intrigue researchers. Some inscriptions feature symbols and phrasing that appear inconsistent with mainstream Roman funerary practice. Scholars have suggested that these may indicate a lingering influence of earlier Anatolian traditions, perhaps remnants of Phrygian or Hittite ritual preserved in local memory and ritual. Others speculate that secret societies or elite priesthoods may have had a hand in guiding burial practices, leaving coded messages or occult knowledge carved in stone. While evidence remains circumstantial, the possibility invites speculation. Even the tomb's deterioration raises questions. Many remain structurally sound, despite centuries of earthquakes, erosion, and human activity. Could the ancients have selected specific rock formations with remarkable natural stability, or employed construction methods now forgotten, ensuring the endurance of both stone and curse? And what of the tombs that have collapsed or disappeared entirely? Might they have concealed artifacts, inscriptions, or knowledge now lost to time? The city itself complicates the narrative. Aizanoi was a thriving Roman settlement, home to markets, temples, and a remarkable Macellum whose unique design hints at sophisticated engineering. Yet while civic life flourished, the tombs remained secluded, almost otherworldly. This separation of life and death, of daily commerce and ritualized burial, seems intentional. Were the cursed tombs intended as silent sentinels, overseeing the city and maintaining a metaphysical boundary between mortal and divine, or between the living and the dead? Even in contemporary surveys, the tombs continue to reveal surprises. Satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and limited excavation have uncovered subterranean chambers previously unknown, some containing multiple interments and unusual artifacts. Could these discoveries represent an entirely unrecognized stratum of the city's elite burial practices? Or might they suggest that Aizanoi functioned as a center of ritual knowledge, blending Roman civic life with older Anatolian spiritual traditions? Standing among the tombs today, one is struck by the tension between permanence and impermanence. The stone endures, silent and formidable, yet the meanings, the intentions, and the human stories behind these sepulchres remain partially obscured, leaving gaps that invite reflection, imagination, and careful study. And so, as the sun dips low over the valley, casting long shadows across carved facades and narrow paths, one cannot help but wonder, were these tombs merely memorials, or were they something more? A deliberate intersection of architecture, ritual, and human belief in forces that extend beyond the living? Could the curses inscribed on stone still exert a symbolic influence, not in supernatural terms, but through the awe, respect, and trepidation they instill in all who approach? And perhaps most hauntingly, what else lies buried beneath the surface of Aizanoi? Artifacts, inscriptions, or knowledge still hidden from the eyes of the living, waiting silently for discovery. In the cursed tombs of Aizanoi, the past does not speak in a single voice. It whispers, it suggests, and it challenges. The city's dead rest in silent grandeur, yet the questions they leave behind continue to beckon, an invitation to observe carefully, reflect deeply, and confront the delicate boundary between history, belief, and the enduring mysteries of human experience. From the solemn stones of Aizanoi, where tombs stand as guardians of both memory and mystery, our journey now takes us deep into the heart of Anatolia, to a place where the past seems to linger in the very air, the ancient city of Hattusa. Known as the capital of the Hittite Empire, Hattusa rises from the landscape not as a single monument, but as a sprawling network of walls, gates, and temples, many of which are so ruined, so stripped by time, that they appear ghostly. It is here, among these spectral ruins, that the so-called ghost temples reside, their silent columns and fractured reliefs whispering of rituals, beliefs, and secrets that refuse to be fully understood. The approach to Hattusa is itself a prelude to mystery. Rugged hills and deep valleys frame the city, giving it a natural fortification and a sense of seclusion that ancient planners must have valued. Even today, from a distance, the outlines of walls and gates emerge like the bones of some colossal creature, partly hidden by forest and shadow. As one walks through the site, the ghosts of history become tangible. The ruined streets echo with imagined footsteps. The empty foundations seem to suggest invisible structures, and the air carries a weight that is hard to describe, a palpable reminder that this city once commanded an empire spanning vast regions of Anatolia and beyond. Hattusa flourished primarily during the late 2nd millennium BC, reaching its zenith under kings like Suppiluliuma I and Muwatalli II. At its height, it was a center of political power, religious practice, and international diplomacy, rivaling contemporary civilizations such as Egypt, Babylon, and the kingdoms of Palestine. Yet today, the temples of Hattusa are fragmented and largely silent, their interiors hollowed by centuries of looting, earthquakes, and natural decay. Still, their scale and design hint at a sophistication and spiritual intent that demands attention. The term ghost temples is not a modern invention. Archaeologists and local tradition alike refer to several structures, particularly the temples near the Great Temple Complex and the rock-cut sanctuary known as Yazılıkaya, as spectral not only because of their ruinous state, but because of their uncanny ability to evoke presence where nothing visible remains. Massive stone blocks, some weighing several tons, stand precariously balanced. Reliefs, though partially eroded, suggest scenes of gods, kings, and mythical creatures engaged in ceremonial acts, and certain chambers align with sunlight or shadow in ways that hint at deliberate astronomical observation. Walking among these temples, one cannot shake the sense that the builders intended to manipulate both space and perception, to craft an environment where the divine and mortal intersect. The architecture of Hattusa's temples is both striking and enigmatic. Many are built in mud brick atop stone foundations, leaving only partial walls to testify to their former grandeur. Some temples contain evidence of altars, niches, and ceremonial platforms, suggesting ritual activity that went beyond simple worship. Yet despite the visible traces, the function of many spaces remains a matter of debate. Were these temples exclusively religious, or did they also serve political or judicial roles? Could some have functioned as repositories for sacred knowledge, secret archives, or ritual objects whose purpose was never meant to be fully understood by outsiders? One cannot overlook the ghostly reliefs that survive. Carved into cliffs and temple walls, figures of gods and goddesses, often armed, sometimes winged, appear frozen mid-motion. They are depicted in processions, in battle, or in scenes of offering, yet the precise narrative is difficult to reconstruct. Some scholars suggest these reliefs encode ritual sequences or cosmological hierarchies, while others see possible connections to celestial observation, seasonal rites, or even political propaganda. Could the ghostly quality of these carvings, their erosion, their partial incompleteness, have been intentional, serving to obscure certain truths from the uninitiated? Or is their spectral presence purely the product of millennia of decay? Light and shadow play a particularly mysterious role in these structures. In some temples, morning sunlight penetrates narrow openings to illuminate a single relief, while in other chambers, the sun's rays strike inscriptions only on solstices or equinoxes. Was this accidental, or did the Hittite architects deliberately align their sanctuaries to celestial events, creating a ritual interplay of illumination and shadow? And if intentional, what knowledge or power were they attempting to harness through these temporal alignments? Even the city's spatial arrangement contributes to the sense of mystery. Temples are positioned not simply near the city center, but along terraces, hillsides, and valleys, often in alignment with gates, roads, and other civic structures. Scholars have speculated that this reflects a deliberate attempt to create sacred lines of sight, connecting political power with religious authority. Could the ghost temples themselves have functioned as markers in a sacred geography, intended to guide processions, rituals, or the observation of the heavens? Or might they have been designed as loci of hidden knowledge, visible only to those with the understanding to interpret them correctly? Hattusa's rituals, recorded in surviving cuneiform tablets, provide tantalizing but incomplete clues. Texts describe offerings, festivals, and ceremonies in honor of deities such as the storm god Tarhuna and the sun goddess Arina, yet much of the detail has been lost. How these rituals were enacted within the temples, and how the architecture itself may have amplified or directed ritual experience, remains speculative. Some researchers even suggest that hidden chambers, secret alcoves, or symbolic carvings contained knowledge accessible only to a select priestly class. Could some of this sacred knowledge remain buried, unexcavated, or deliberately concealed beneath the ruins, waiting to be rediscovered? The ghost temples also raise profound questions about perception and memory. Visitors today often describe an almost uncanny feeling, a sense of presence, of being observed, or of moving through a space alive with echoes of the past. Is this simply the effect of scale, decay, and imagination, or might it hint at a deliberate sensory design by the Hittites, a layering of architecture, relief, and ritual intended to create psychological impact? Some theorists propose that the Hittites sought to instill a tangible sense of awe, reverence, or even fear, blending civic power with spiritual authority in a way that transcends time. Modern technology continues to reveal the city's secrets. LiDAR scans, ground-penetrating radar, and 3D reconstructions uncover foundations of temples previously unknown, hidden stairways, and subterranean chambers. Artifacts recovered from these sites hint at a richness of religious practice and ceremonial complexity that exceeds what the surviving architecture alone might suggest. Could there be sanctuaries still buried beneath layers of earth and debris, awaiting discovery? And if so, What rituals, artifacts, or knowledge lie waiting, preserved in silence for millennia? As the sun sets over the plateau of Anatolia, casting long shadows across the temple ruins, one cannot ignore the lingering question: why do these structures evoke a sense of spectral presence that seems to transcend mere ruin? Are the ghost temples of Hattusa simply the remnants of a once great civilization, or do they represent something deeper, a deliberate interplay of architecture, ritual, and perception designed to endure beyond the lives of those who built them? And perhaps most compellingly, what truths about Hittite cosmology, governance, and spiritual practice remain hidden, waiting for those willing to observe, reflect, and explore with patience and care? In the ghost temples of Hattusa, history does not speak in a single voice. It whispers through fractured reliefs, through empty chambers, and through the very layout of a city built to impress, to inspire, and perhaps to conceal. Here, the past is both present and elusive, tangible yet enigmatic, inviting modern observers to question not only what we know of the Hittites, but how much remains buried in plain sight, waiting for discovery. To walk among these temples is to walk in the shadow of centuries, a shadow cast not only by the stones themselves, but by the collective memory, belief, and ingenuity of a civilization that sought to leave its mark, yet also to guard its deepest mysteries. And as we stand among these spectral columns and faded reliefs, we are left with a haunting, open-ended question. What other secrets of the ghost temples and of Hattusa itself remain concealed, silently challenging us to uncover them, interpret them, and understand a civilization whose voice still resonates across time, though never fully audible? From the silent ghost temples of Hattusa, where stone still holds the echo of vanished rituals and forgotten voices, the journey now turns southward once more. Away from the central Anatolian plateau, the land begins to break apart, folding into mountains that descend abruptly toward the Mediterranean coast. The air grows warmer, heavier with salt and pine. Roads narrow, winding between cliffs that seem to have been split open by time itself. And here, carved into those cliffs, suspended between sky and sea, lies one of the most visually striking and enigmatic funerary landscapes of the ancient world: the Lycian rock-cut tombs. At first glance, they appear almost impossible, not built on the cliffs, but carved into them. High above valleys and riverbeds, facades resembling miniature temples cling to vertical rock faces. Some stand so elevated that they seem unreachable without flight. Others are positioned along sheer cliff walls where even modern climbers move with caution. And yet, thousands of years ago, they were not only accessed, but used, maintained, and revered. This is the world of ancient Lycia, a region that flourished along the rugged southwestern coast of Anatolia from roughly the 5th century BC onward. A civilization influenced by Greek culture, yet distinct in its identity, Lycian society developed a funerary tradition, unlike almost anything else in the ancient Mediterranean world. But why place the dead in the cliffs? And more intriguingly, how? The Lycian tombs are not hidden in the sense of secrecy. They are hidden in the sense of elevation and perspective. They dominate the landscape, watching over valleys, harbors, and settlements below. Some resemble wooden houses frozen in stone. Others mimic elaborate temples with columns, pediments, and carved reliefs. Inside, however, many are surprisingly simple. A single chamber, often empty today, shaped for a burial that has long since vanished. Mainstream archaeology explains this dramatic placement through belief. The Lycians, it is widely understood, held a form of funerary ideology in which the dead were elevated, literally placed closer to the sky. Some scholars suggest this reflects a desire to bring the deceased nearer to divine realms or protect them from disturbance. Others emphasize social display, elite families marking their status in the most visible way possible, ensuring that their memory would not fade into the valleys below. But even these explanations do not fully resolve the impression these tombs leave behind. Because standing beneath them, looking upward at stone facades suspended in impossible positions, the experience is not simply architectural, it is psychological. They do not feel like graves. They feel like messages. Carved into the cliffs of places such as Myra and the surrounding Lycian landscape, these tombs form entire necropolises suspended above the living world. At Myra, for example, the cliff face becomes a vertical city of the dead, rows of tombs stacked in tiers, each one carefully positioned, each one distinct yet part of a larger visual rhythm. And yet, despite this apparent order, questions remain. Why do some tombs imitate wooden architecture so precisely, complete with beam-like carvings and roof structures that serve no functional purpose in stone? Were these replicas of actual houses meant to symbolize continuity between life and death? Or were they something more? Ritual reconstructions of dwellings intended for another realm, a place where the dead would continue existence in familiar form. Inside certain tombs, faint traces of reliefs remain. Warriors, banquets, mythological scenes. But erosion has erased much of the detail, leaving behind incomplete narratives carved into stone. What remains is suggestive rather than definitive. Fragments of stories that once may have guided the living in understanding the journey of the dead. And then there is the question of access. How were these tombs actually reached? Some appear accessible via carved footholds, wooden scaffolding, now long gone, or narrow ledges. But others seem almost deliberately inaccessible, positioned in locations where construction and ritual placement would have required extraordinary effort. Modern engineers and archaeologists continue to debate how ancient workers managed such feats without modern safety systems, cranes, or permanent infrastructure. Was there temporary scaffolding made of timber? Rope systems? Or did the Lycians possess construction techniques that have left little trace in the archaeological record? Or, more intriguingly, was accessibility not meant to be practical at all, but symbolic? A tomb that cannot be easily reached might not require frequent visitation. It might exist not for the living to enter, but for them to observe from below. A permanent presence in the landscape rather than a functional space. Yet even this interpretation leaves something unresolved, because the Lycian tombs are not isolated anomalies. They are part of a broader cultural system. Nearby, monumental sarcophagi rest on stone bases in open fields, while underground chamber tombs extend into hillsides. This diversity suggests a complex funerary hierarchy, different burial types for different social statuses, beliefs, or perhaps even professions. Some tombs contain inscriptions naming the deceased, while others remain anonymous, their identities erased or never recorded. And here, the mystery deepens again. Why such variation within a seemingly unified culture? Was Lycian funerary practice standardized, or fluid and evolving over centuries? And what role did external influences play? Greek artistic styles are evident in many carvings, especially after Lycia's incorporation into the wider Hellenistic world following the conquests of Alexander the Great. Yet earlier tombs retain distinctly local features that resist easy categorization. This blend of cultural influence raises further questions about identity. Were these tombs expressions of purely Lycian belief, or a fusion of multiple traditions layered over time? Some scholars have even proposed that the tomb's elevated placement may have had astronomical or cosmological significance. Certain facades appear to align with sight lines across valleys or toward distant peaks where celestial events, sunrise positions, solstice alignments, might have been observed. While no definitive pattern has been universally accepted, the possibility persists that the cliffs themselves were part of a larger sacred geography, where land, sky, and burial were interconnected. Local folklore, preserved through centuries of oral tradition, adds another layer. Stories speak of spirits moving along cliff faces at dusk, of glowing lights appearing near tomb entrances, and of echoes carried strangely through valleys where no sound should travel. While such accounts are naturally viewed with skepticism in archaeological discourse, they reflect a persistent cultural memory, an enduring sense that these places are not entirely silent. Even modern visitors sometimes describe an unsettling sensation when standing below the tombs, a feeling of being observed from above, of presence lingering in stone that should be inert. Whether this is psychological, environmental, or purely imaginative remains open to interpretation, but the effect is consistent enough to be noted, and so the cliffs continue to hold their silence. Archaeological work in Lycia is ongoing, with new surveys occasionally revealing previously undocumented tombs hidden behind vegetation or eroded rock formations. Some of these discoveries raise further questions about scale. Were there once many more tombs that have since collapsed or been lost to earthquakes and coastal erosion? Could entire sections of Lycian funerary landscapes still be undiscovered, concealed in terrain too remote or unstable to fully explore? And if so, what might still remain unseen? As the Mediterranean light fades across the cliffs of Lycian rock-cut tombs, the tombs shift in appearance. Shadows lengthen across carved facades, giving the impression of depth where none exists, and motion where stone is still. The boundary between architecture and landscape becomes less distinct, as if the cliffs themselves are participating in the act of remembrance. And in that quiet transformation of light and stone, one question lingers, subtle, unresolved, and persistent. Were the hidden tombs of Lycia designed simply to preserve the dead, or were they also meant to ensure that the living would never stop looking up, wondering what else might still be watching from the cliffs above? From the vertical cliffs of Lycia, where the dead hang above valleys in a precarious balance of stone and shadow, our path now leads northeast into the rugged mountains of southeastern Anatolia. The terrain grows harsher, the wind sharper, and the vistas more expansive. The road twists through highland plateaus where the sky stretches wide, unbroken by trees, and where the air carries the faint chill of elevation even in the warmth of midday sun. It is here, in this austere and formidable landscape, that one of the most enigmatic monuments of the ancient world awaits, Mount Nemrut. At an elevation of over 2,100 meters, the summit rises like an altar to the heavens, crowned with colossal statues and funerary terraces that dominate the horizon. To approach Nemrut is to feel the scale of ambition and the audacity of those who built here, centuries ago, in a time when even moderate engineering feats challenged entire civilizations. The sight is immediately striking. From a distance, the summit appears almost unnatural in its regularity, its terraces cut into the mountain flanks with geometric precision. And then, as one draws closer, the colossal heads come into view, stone giants scattered across the plateau, some toppled, some eroded, all monumental in scale. Each statue measures between 2 and 8 meters in height, representing kings, gods, and mythic figures. Their faces, though marred by centuries of frost, wind, and earthquake, retain a solemn presence, staring timelessly across the vast plains below. Mount Nemrut's construction dates to the 1st century BC, during the reign of King Antiochus I of the Commagene Kingdom, a small but culturally ambitious polity situated between what we now recognize as southeastern Turkey and the northern territories of ancient Palestine. Antiochus, a ruler with a keen sense of both political and spiritual theater, sought to cement his dynasty's legacy through a monumental funerary complex unlike any other in the ancient world. And he did so at a site that few would have considered practical or safe, a mountain summit reached only after a grueling climb. The arrangement of the statues and terraces is deliberate, almost ritualistic. East and west terraces host rows of seated deities and regal figures, while the north terrace is dominated by the massive tumulus, a conical mound of crushed rock concealing the king's tomb. Mainstream archaeology interprets this layout as a symbolic axis connecting the living, the dead, and the divine, a terrestrial mirror of celestial order. The king, elevated above all, becomes both an intermediary and a participant in a cosmic drama that combines local traditions, Persian influences, and Hellenistic artistry. Yet, even with extensive study, Mount Nemrut continues to puzzle. The colossal heads, many of which have fallen from their seated bodies, are aligned in ways that suggest astronomical intention. Some researchers argue that the site may have been designed to mark solar, lunar, or planetary events. Others see alignments with distant mountain peaks or horizon points, hinting at sacred geography. Were these placements purely ceremonial, or did they serve a functional purpose in ancient observation? And if so, what knowledge did the builders encode in stone that is now only partially legible to modern eyes? The statues themselves are intriguing in design. They blend Eastern and Western artistic traditions. Faces bear Greco-Roman features, while regalia, clothing, and inscriptions reflect Persian and local influences. This hybrid style is more than decorative. It appears to signal political as well as spiritual ideology. Antiochus claimed descent from both Persian and Greek lineages, and by portraying himself among gods, he crafted an image of divine authority that transcended ordinary kingship. Was this a display of mere propaganda, or did it reflect a sincere cosmological philosophy, one in which the king actively participated in divine cycles and celestial observation? The tumulus, a vast mound of crushed rock concealing Antiochus's tomb, adds another layer of mystery. Its interior has never been conclusively excavated. Centuries of attempts to breach it yielded no documented discoveries. Some suggest the tomb may have been looted in antiquity, while others argue that it remains intact, hiding treasures, inscriptions, or rituals known only to the ancient architects. Modern technology, including ground-penetrating radar and drone surveys, has begun to probe beneath the mound, revealing anomalies and cavities, but nothing definitive. What is hidden beneath that mass of stone? And why has the mountain, despite millennia of exposure, retained such a carefully constructed secrecy? Even the weather at Nemrut adds to its otherworldly quality. Snow and frost carve the landscape into jagged patterns, while winds sculpt layers of dust and debris, shifting the summit with each season. In winter, statues are partially buried, emerging only at high angles of sunlight, as if revealing themselves selectively. In summer, the sun illuminates inscriptions along the terraces that are nearly invisible in shadow. This interaction between natural elements and human design, whether intentional or incidental, creates a sense that the mountain is alive, participating in the unfolding of time and memory. Local lore adds subtle, almost imperceptible dimensions to the mystery. Stories passed through generations describe voices carried by wind, figures glimpsed at dawn among the toppled heads, and lights that appear to hover around the tumulus at twilight. While such tales are often dismissed by scholars as legend, they reflect a persistent cultural perception. Nemrut is not merely a monument, but a place that challenges ordinary perception, a threshold between human and divine, past and present. Archaeological work at Nemrut has revealed inscriptions in Greek and Aramaic that honor the king, his ancestors, and the gods. These inscriptions outline rituals, prayers, and religious beliefs that were central to the Commagene worldview. They also hint at Antiochus's desire to integrate the king's identity with the cosmos itself. But the texts leave gaps. Questions of ritual practice, tomb contents, and celestial alignment remain unresolved. Some inscriptions reference sacred festivals or processions across the terraces, yet no definitive evidence of such ceremonies survives. How were these rituals enacted? Did participants ascend to the summit regularly, or was the site primarily symbolic, intended to convey awe and legitimacy to those in the valleys below? Speculative theories abound. Some suggest that the site may have functioned as an observatory, a calendar, or even a repository of hidden knowledge intended for initiates. Others focus on the psychological effect of scale. The colossal figures dwarfing any human observer create an almost hypnotic impression, reminding all who approach of the power of the divine and the impermanence of mortal life. Perhaps the mountain itself was a tool of memory, designed to ensure that the king's presence and the spiritual framework he constructed would endure indefinitely. And yet, for all that has been studied, Nemrut retains an ineffable quality. It is both monumental and intimate, public and secretive, tangible and ethereal. The combination of artistry, architecture, and natural environment produces a narrative that is never fully explicable. What were the full intentions of Antiochus? How much knowledge has been lost to time, erosion, or human intervention? Could there be chambers, inscriptions, or artifacts still undiscovered, lying beneath the tumulus or hidden among fractured stones? As the sun sets behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the summit, the statues' faces are transformed once more. Their expressions seem to change with the light, watching the horizon with a solemn, eternal gaze. Wind whistles through gaps in the terraces, and snow or dust shifts across stone surfaces, leaving impressions that appear almost intentional. And in this interplay of natural and human forces, one is reminded that history does not fully yield its secrets, even in places as meticulously constructed as Mount Nemrut. We are left with the mountain itself, colossal, enigmatic, and silent, posing questions that remain unresolved. Was Mount Nemrut conceived purely as a monument to a king's power, or as a sophisticated ritual landscape connecting earth, sky, and divine authority? What knowledge did the architects encode into its terraces, statues, and alignments, and how much of it is still waiting to be read? And most profoundly, what does the summit, with its isolated grandeur and silent gaze, tell us about the aspirations, beliefs, and vision of a civilization that dared to carve immortality into the very rocks of the earth? At Nemrut, history is tangible yet elusive. The mountain itself is a relic of ambition, faith, and artistry, towering over the landscape as both witness and enigma. It challenges the observer to ponder not only the world of the Commagene kings, but also the enduring question that binds all archaeological mystery. How much of the past remains hidden, and how much must we infer from shadow, scale, and the silent, watchful stones themselves? Here, at the summit, the journey through Anatolia's mysteries reaches a threshold, a point where ambition meets eternity, and where the past whispers in monumental silence, leaving us with the haunting, open-ended realization that the answers may forever lie just out of reach. From the towering heights of Mount Nemrut, where colossal stone faces gaze silently across highland plateaus, we descend into a different kind of mystery, one not of monumental sculptures, but of human settlement itself. The journey leads us to the rolling plains of central Anatolia, a landscape that seems tranquil and unassuming at first glance. Yet beneath this seemingly gentle terrain lies one of the earliest and most enigmatic cities in human history, Çatalhöyük. Approaching the site today, the first impression is of a subtle rise in the earth, a low mound standing quietly against the horizon. It is easy to underestimate its significance, yet for those who walk its excavated terraces, the experience is nothing short of transformative. Çatalhöyük is not a city in the modern sense. It is a sprawling, densely packed settlement from approximately 7,100 BC to 5,700 BC. Remarkable not for towering monuments, but for the intimacy and intricacy of its design. The settlement unfolds like a labyrinth frozen in time. Houses were constructed side by side, their walls pressed together without streets between them. Residents accessed their homes by climbing onto roofs, entering through openings above rather than conventional doors. This rooftop circulation created a continuous, interwoven surface, a community not divided by thoroughfares but united across a shared plane of habitation. Walking among these remnants, one senses a fluidity of space rarely seen in later urban planning. Homes as extensions of the landscape, and the landscape itself shaped by human hands over centuries. Çatalhöyük's architecture is humble yet sophisticated. Mud brick walls, now worn and weathered, enclose rooms that served multiple purposes: domestic life, storage, ritual practice. Within many dwellings, archaeologists have uncovered hearths, platforms, and plastered walls adorned with red ochre and intricate murals. These murals depict animals, human figures, geometric patterns, and scenes that suggest symbolic or spiritual significance. Some images appear to celebrate hunting, others fertility, and some are enigmatic in ways that invite speculation. Were they storytelling devices, religious icons, or early forms of historical record? The burials within Çatalhöyük are equally fascinating. Instead of cemeteries separate from living spaces, residents were interred beneath the floors of their homes. Bodies were sometimes accompanied by tools, ornaments, and animal remains. The practice of burying the dead within the living space suggests a worldview in which life and death were intertwined, a continuity between the realms of the living and the dead. Did these burials serve a protective function, safeguarding both spirits and possessions? Or did they symbolize a deeper, perhaps ritualistic, understanding of ancestry and the cycles of life? Çatalhöyük also challenges assumptions about social organization. Despite its size, estimates suggest as many as 5,000 to 8,000 people at its peak. There is little evidence of hierarchical structures or centralized authority. The uniformity of house sizes and the absence of monumental palaces or administrative buildings suggest a community that operated through consensus or localized leadership. Was this a deliberate cultural choice, or a reflection of a society still developing mechanisms of governance? And if so, how did such a densely populated settlement manage resources, trade, and social cohesion over centuries without descending into conflict? The artistry of Çatalhöyük offers further mysteries. Clay figurines, often of women or hybrid human-animal forms, suggest a rich symbolic culture. Some scholars interpret these as fertility icons, others as deities or shamanic figures. Wall paintings, too, carry motifs that hint at ritualistic practice, but the meanings remain speculative. Could these images represent a shared mythology, a spiritual cosmology, or a symbolic map of the community's understanding of the world? Environmental evidence adds yet another layer of intrigue. Analysis of animal bones, plant remains, and pollen indicates that residents practiced early forms of agriculture and animal husbandry. They cultivated wheat, barley, and legumes while domesticating cattle, sheep, and goats. This was not simply subsistence farming. Evidence points to selective breeding and landscape management, indicating sophisticated ecological knowledge. Yet why did such a successful and seemingly sustainable settlement eventually decline? Was it environmental stress, resource depletion, disease, or social transformation that led to its abandonment around 5700 BC? The spatial organization of Çatalhöyük raises questions about perception and ritual. The lack of streets and the reliance on rooftop access create a continuous, almost communal experience of movement. The placement of shrines, murals, and symbolic objects within homes suggests that ritual was deeply integrated into daily life. Was the settlement itself a sacred space, designed to reflect cosmological or spiritual beliefs in every aspect of architecture and orientation? Some researchers propose that certain murals and reliefs align with solar or seasonal events, hinting at a subtle observational astronomy practiced within domestic settings. Could Çatalhöyük have functioned as both a living city and a ceremonial observatory? Artifacts hint at external connections. Obsidian tools from distant volcanic regions, seashells from the Aegean, and traces of pigments suggest trade networks extending beyond Anatolia. These connections imply that the residents of Çatalhöyük were not isolated. They were part of a broader web of interaction, exchange, and cultural diffusion. Yet, despite these networks, the settlement remains strikingly unique. Its architectural choices, burial practices, and symbolic repertoire appear singular, raising the question, what cultural or spiritual philosophy guided this community in ways that were not replicated elsewhere for millennia? Speculative theories have emerged to address the site's mysteries. Some posit that Çatalhöyük may have functioned as an early religious center, where social cohesion was reinforced through shared ritual. Others suggest it could have been a proto-urban experiment, exploring the limits of population density, cooperative labor, and resource management long before the rise of Mesopotamian city-states. Fringe theories, often fueled by the richness of the murals, speculate on shamanic or even extraterrestrial influences, but these remain unverified. Yet the very presence of such speculation underscores the enduring fascination with the settlement, a place where the ordinary and the extraordinary seem intertwined. Even after decades of excavation, new questions continue to arise. Recent studies using chemical and DNA analysis reveal dietary diversity, intermarriage patterns, and possible disease pressures. Ground-penetrating radar has uncovered previously unknown structures, hinting at areas yet unexplored. Each discovery illuminates part of the picture, but simultaneously deepens the mystery. How much of Çatalhöyük's story can ever be fully reconstructed? How did its residents experience their world, and what unseen cultural logic guided their choices? The experience of walking through Çatalhöyük today is sensory and contemplative. Dust rises from ancient floors, footsteps echo faintly in hollowed rooms, and the horizon stretches across Anatolian plains, connecting the mound to a landscape that has witnessed millennia of human endeavor. In the muted light of early morning or late afternoon, the settlement takes on a timeless quality. The past and present overlap, the living and the dead seem to coexist, and the traces of human creativity and spirituality remain palpable. Here, as with Mount Nemrut, the mysteries of human ambition, belief, and innovation converge. Çatalhöyük is neither a monument of kings nor a city of gods. It is a testament to the ingenuity and symbolic life of ordinary people, and to the subtle ways they shaped their world. It challenges modern assumptions about urbanization, social organization, and the very nature of early human consciousness. And yet, even with meticulous excavation and rigorous scholarship, the site continues to resist complete understanding. We are left with open questions. Why did this settlement endure for over a millennium before being abandoned? What social or spiritual principles dictated the unusual architecture and burial practices? How much cultural knowledge, encoded in murals, figurines, and spatial design, remains undeciphered? And above all, what does Çatalhöyük reveal about the human capacity for imagination, ritual, and community in a world that had yet to see cities as we know them today? In the quiet of the Anatolian plains, standing atop the gentle rise of the mound, one is struck by the enormity of these questions. Çatalhöyük is not merely an archaeological site. It is a window into the early human mind, a landscape shaped by labor, belief, and vision, where mystery persists not because it is unknowable, but because it is subtle, layered, and profoundly human. As the sun casts long shadows over the rooftops and murals, the settlement whispers across millennia, inviting us to ponder not only how people lived, but how they dreamed, imagined, and sought to make meaning in a vast, uncertain world. And in that contemplation, we are left with the enduring enigma of Çatalhöyük, a city that is at once familiar and alien, ordinary and extraordinary, known in part yet forever holding secrets just beyond our reach. From the quiet remains of Çatalhöyük, where early humans lived without streets, burying their dead beneath their floors and painting their world directly onto plastered walls, the journey continues northward once again across the Anatolian plateau. The landscape shifts subtly but decisively. The broad plains give way to rolling uplands, where fields of wheat and barley stretch toward distant hills. The wind here feels different, sharper, more deliberate, as if it has passed over countless centuries of human habitation and carried their traces forward in invisible layers. And in this quiet, agricultural heartland of central Anatolia lies another site, less visually overwhelming than Mount Nemrut, less densely reconstructed than Çatalhöyük, yet carrying a mystery that feels no less profound: Alacahöyük. At first glance, Alacahöyük does not announce itself dramatically. The site is a gentle mound rising from the plain, surrounded by fields and low hills that seem almost indifferent to its presence. But this unassuming profile is deceptive. Beneath this modest elevation lies one of the earliest known urban and ceremonial centers of Anatolia, with layers of occupation stretching back into the early Bronze Age, long before the rise of the Hittite Empire that would later dominate the region. And it is here, beneath soil, stone, and silence, that one of Anatolia's most enigmatic archaeological discoveries was made. The royal tombs of Alacahöyük, discovered in the 1930s during systematic excavations led by Turkish archaeologists, these burials immediately challenged expectations about early Anatolian societies. The tombs date to the 3rd millennium BC, a period when writing had not yet fully developed in the region, and much of human history was still transmitted through oral tradition, ritual, and material culture rather than written record. Yet what was uncovered was anything but simple. The graves contained richly furnished burials, gold diadems, elaborate bronze standards, finely worked daggers, ceremonial vessels, and intricate animal motifs cast in precious metals. Bulls, deer, and solar symbols appear repeatedly, carefully crafted, deliberately placed, and clearly meaningful. These were not ordinary burials. They belonged to individuals of extraordinary status, possibly rulers, priests, or figures who combined both roles in a society whose structure we still do not fully understand. But the mystery is not only in what was found. It is in what we cannot yet fully explain. Unlike later civilizations, the culture of Alacahöyük leaves behind no written records from this earliest phase. There are no inscriptions naming kings, no texts explaining rituals, no explicit explanation of the symbolism embedded in the grave goods. Everything must be interpreted through objects, patterns, and spatial arrangements, and those interpretations are not always straightforward. The animal motifs, for example, are particularly intriguing. Deer appear with elongated antlers in stylized forms, bulls are rendered with powerful abstraction, and solar discs, sometimes combined with wings or geometric patterns, suggest a symbolic system that may have linked celestial forces with earthly authority. Mainstream archaeology often interprets these as expressions of fertility cults, solar worship, or early Indo-European symbolic traditions that would later influence Hittite religious iconography. But even within these interpretations, questions remain. Why such emphasis on animal forms in funerary contexts? And why are certain animals repeatedly associated with specific types of artifacts, such as bronze standards mounted on poles that may have been carried in ritual processions? Were these symbols purely decorative, or did they represent something more structured, perhaps a codified system of belief, authority, or cosmology that has not survived in textual form? The tombs themselves also raise architectural questions. They are arranged in a relatively organized cemetery area, yet there is variation in construction style, burial orientation, and grave goods. Some tombs are richly furnished, while others are comparatively modest. This disparity suggests a form of social hierarchy, but its exact nature remains uncertain. Was this a hereditary elite, a priestly class, or something more fluid, where status was earned through ritual, leadership, or economic control? And how did such a society organize itself in a time before formal written law or administrative bureaucracy in Anatolia? Beyond the tombs, Alacahöyük reveals traces of monumental architecture from later periods, particularly the Hittite era. Massive stone foundations, ceremonial gates, and reliefs depicting sphinx-like figures suggest that the site continued to hold importance long after the Bronze Age burials were completed. The famous Sphinx Gate, with its imposing carved figures, marks a transition from earlier indigenous traditions into the structured imperial symbolism of the Hittite state. Yet even here, continuity and rupture exist side by side. Did the Hittites inherit and reinterpret the sacred significance of Alacahöyük? Or did they deliberately reshape an older ceremonial landscape to assert dominance over earlier traditions, whose meanings were already fading into obscurity? Some scholars suggest that Alacahöyük may have been a ritual center long before it became part of the Hittite political sphere, a place where seasonal ceremonies, funerary rites, or ancestral worship were practiced across generations. If so, the site may represent not just a settlement, but a layered sacred geography, where meaning accumulated over centuries rather than being replaced outright. And yet, despite decades of excavation, the early phase of Alacahöyük still resists full interpretation. Even the function of certain structures remains debated. Were they temples, administrative buildings, or ceremonial halls? The absence of written explanation forces researchers to rely on comparative analysis with later Anatolian cultures, Mesopotamian parallels, and broader Indo-European patterns. But each comparison introduces new uncertainties as well as insights. There is also the question of external influence. Alacahöyük's metalwork is extraordinarily sophisticated for its time, suggesting advanced metallurgical knowledge. Some scholars propose connections with neighboring regions of the Near East, where early urban cultures were already developing complex trade networks. Could Alacahöyük have been part of a wider exchange system stretching across Anatolia and into regions such as Mesopotamia or even the distant lands of Palestine? If so, what ideas, technologies, or beliefs might have traveled alongside goods and materials? Or did this culture develop its symbolic and technological systems independently, shaped primarily by local environmental and social conditions? The uncertainty is part of what makes the site so compelling. Even the discovery of the tombs themselves carries a sense of historical tension. When archaeologists first uncovered the rich graves, they were confronted not just with artifacts, but with an entire worldview preserved in metal and stone. Yet, without written context, interpretation remains an act of careful reconstruction, an attempt to translate a symbolic language whose grammar is only partially known. Modern techniques continue to refine our understanding. Metallurgical analysis reveals complex alloy compositions, indicating controlled production processes. Spatial mapping of the tombs suggests deliberate planning. Wear patterns on artifacts hint at ritual use before burial. And yet, despite all this detail, the deeper questions persist. Why were these individuals buried with such extraordinary wealth? What role did ritual play in legitimizing authority? And what beliefs about death, ancestry, and the cosmos guided these practices? As one moves through Alacahöyük today, the site feels both intimate and distant. The reconstructed sections offer a glimpse into architectural grandeur, but the true complexity lies beneath layers of earth still awaiting excavation. The surrounding landscape remains largely unchanged, reinforcing the sense that time here moves differently, slowly accumulating meaning rather than erasing it. And so the site holds its silence. Not an empty silence, but a dense one, filled with implication, suggestion, and unresolved narrative threads. It invites questions rather than answers. Were the people of Alacahöyük part of a forgotten cultural horizon that once stretched across Anatolia, shaping early expressions of power and belief long before written history began to record them? Or was this a unique, localized tradition whose symbols and practices evolved independently, never fully transmitted beyond its own time? And perhaps most intriguingly, what other graves, artifacts, or ceremonial spaces remain undiscovered beneath the Anatolian soil, waiting to reshape our understanding once again? As the wind moves across the plains of Alacahöyük, passing over fields that conceal as much as they reveal, one final question lingers in the quiet air. How much of this ancient world has truly been uncovered, and how much still rests beneath the surface, waiting for the next moment of discovery to bring it back into the light? From the silent plains of Alacahöyük, where Bronze Age graves still guard their secrets beneath layers of Anatolian soil, the journey shifts once again, this time moving southwest into a landscape shaped not by open horizons, but by stone that seems to swallow the earth itself. As the terrain approaches the region of Cappadocia, the land begins to change in a way that feels almost unnatural. Volcanic rock softens into strange, sculpted forms, cones, pillars, and undulating ridges carved not by human hands alone, but by wind, water, and time working together over millennia. Villages appear partially embedded into the landscape, their structures blending into the rock as if reluctant to fully separate from it. And then, beneath this surreal surface, the ground reveals something even more extraordinary. A descent. Not into a tomb, not into a temple, but into an entire city hidden beneath the earth. This is Kaymaklı underground city. At first, it is almost difficult to comprehend what lies beneath the surface. From above, Kaymaklı appears unremarkable, an ordinary settlement in central Anatolia. But beneath it stretches a vast subterranean labyrinth, carved deep into volcanic tuff, descending multiple levels below ground. Narrow passageways, storage rooms, ventilation shafts, kitchens, wine presses, stables, and communal chambers unfold layer by layer, forming a fully functional urban environment hidden from the world above. It is not a single structure. It is a system. A city within the earth. The origins of Kaymaklı underground city are generally attributed to early Christian communities, with major expansion occurring during the Byzantine period, particularly between the 4th and 10th centuries AD. Historical context suggests that these underground networks were used as refuges during times of invasion and instability, especially during periods of Arab-Byzantine conflict, when the region became a contested frontier. But even this explanation only partially accounts for what is found here. Because the scale of Kaymaklı is extraordinary. Only a fraction of the city is currently open to the public, yet it is believed to extend through at least 8 levels underground, with some estimates suggesting even more interconnected spaces beyond what has been fully mapped. The passages are narrow, sometimes intentionally constricted, forcing movement in single file. Doorways are sealed with massive circular stone doors that could be rolled into place, effectively isolating entire sections of the city from intruders. And here, an immediate question arises. How does a society conceive of urban life underground, not as temporary shelter, but as a sustained, multi-level environment? Mainstream archaeology explains this through necessity. The soft volcanic rock of Cappadocia made excavation relatively feasible, while the region's turbulent history created repeated incentives for concealment and protection. Over time, what may have begun as simple storage chambers or temporary shelters gradually expanded into more complex, interconnected refuges. Yet even within this explanation, certain aspects of Kaymaklı resist simple interpretation. For example, the ventilation system. Despite descending dozens of meters below the surface, the city maintains an intricate network of vertical shafts that circulate air between levels. These shafts are not randomly placed. They are carefully distributed to maintain breathable conditions throughout the structure. Some also double as wells, allowing access to water from above-ground sources. The engineering precision required for such a system raises questions about how knowledge of subterranean airflow and structural stability was developed and transmitted. Was this purely empirical trial and error across generations? Or did it reflect a more systematic understanding of underground architecture that has since been lost? As one moves deeper into the city, the functional organization becomes increasingly apparent. Upper levels were typically used for living spaces and communal areas, while lower levels housed storage rooms for grain, wine, and preserved food. Stables were placed near entrances, likely to facilitate quick evacuation or concealment of livestock. The arrangement suggests not chaos, but planning, an architectural logic adapted specifically for life beneath the surface. Yet the deeper one goes, the more questions begin to emerge. Some chambers appear too small for their apparent function, while others seem deliberately isolated. Certain tunnels lead to dead ends, or connect to narrow shafts that are difficult to access. Were these design limitations, later modifications, or intentional features meant to confuse intruders unfamiliar with the layout? And what of the psychological dimension of such a place? Living underground for extended periods would have profoundly altered human perception of time, light, and space. Without natural sunlight, daily rhythms would have depended on artificial lighting and communal coordination. Oil lamps, torches, and carved niches for illumination suggest that light itself was a carefully managed resource. How did communities maintain social cohesion in such conditions? What rituals, routines, or belief systems developed in response to life beneath the earth? Some scholars suggest that underground cities like Kaymaklı were not merely defensive structures, but also symbolic spaces, physical manifestations of spiritual refuge. In early Christian tradition, retreat into hidden places was often associated with protection, purification, and separation from worldly danger. Could these subterranean networks have carried not only practical significance, but also theological meaning? A descent into the earth as a metaphorical descent into faith, endurance, or rebirth? Others propose more speculative interpretations. Some fringe theories suggest that underground complexes in Cappadocia may have ancient origins far older than the Byzantine period, later expanded and repurposed by successive cultures. According to these ideas, early Anatolian civilizations, or even prehistoric communities, may have initiated subterranean excavation traditions that were gradually inherited and modified over millennia. While there is no definitive archaeological consensus supporting such claims, the sheer complexity of the network leaves room for curiosity about its earliest phases. Could some portions of Kaymaklı predate its currently accepted historical framework? Or does its sophistication simply reflect the cumulative intelligence of generations adapting to a challenging environment? Another layer of mystery lies in the connectivity between underground cities. Kaymaklı is not an isolated structure. It is part of a broader subterranean network across Cappadocia, including nearby complexes such as Derinkuyu and Özkonak. Some passages are believed to connect these cities, though many remain unexcavated or inaccessible. If true, this would imply not just isolated refuges, but an interconnected underground civilization spanning multiple settlements. What purpose would such a network serve beyond defense? Could it have functioned as a coordinated system of refuge during large-scale regional crises? Or might it reflect deeper social or cultural integration among communities that chose to live both above and below the surface? Even the entrances to Kaymaklı contribute to its sense of concealment. Many are discreet, blending into modern buildings, courtyards, or natural rock formations. Without prior knowledge, it would be easy to walk past them without realizing that entire worlds lie beneath one's feet. This raises a compelling question about visibility and intention. Was the underground city meant to remain hidden only during times of danger, or was concealment itself an essential aspect of its identity? Modern exploration has revealed only a portion of its full extent. Archaeologists continue to map new corridors, chambers, and ventilation systems, but much of the underground network remains unexplored due to stability concerns and limited access. Each new discovery adds detail to the overall picture, yet also deepens the sense that the city is larger and more complex than currently understood. And perhaps most intriguingly, some passages appear deliberately sealed. Were these closures made for structural safety, ritual reasons, or to protect areas whose contents were meant to remain undisturbed? What might lie beyond those sealed thresholds? Additional living quarters, storage chambers, or entirely unknown levels of the city? As one stands within the narrow tunnels of Kaymaklı underground city, surrounded by carved stone that once sheltered entire communities, a powerful sense of continuity emerges. This is not simply a relic of the past. It is evidence of human adaptability, resilience, and ingenuity in one of the most unconventional environments ever inhabited. And yet, despite all that has been mapped and studied, the underground city retains a quality of ambiguity. It feels both complete and incomplete, known in structure, but not fully understood in purpose or experience. As the passageways narrow and the light fades into carefully placed lamps and filtered openings, one final question lingers in the still air of the subterranean corridors. Was Kaymaklı underground city simply a refuge carved out of necessity? Or was it part of a far more complex tradition of underground life whose origins, scale, and meaning are still waiting, quietly, beneath the earth, to be fully revealed? From the silent corridors of Kaymaklı underground city, where entire communities once lived beneath volcanic rock, hidden in engineered darkness for survival and continuity, the journey now rises once again toward the surface. But the transition is not abrupt, because in Anatolia, even emergence feels gradual, as if the earth itself resists letting go of what it has long preserved. As the tunnels narrow behind us and the last traces of subterranean silence fade, the landscape begins to open into a harsher, more ancient terrain. The roads stretch eastward across arid plateaus, where wind moves freely across stone and soil that seem almost untouched by time. Here, in southeastern Anatolia, far from the dense urban centers of later civilizations, the land feels stripped down to its oldest forms: rock, sky, and silence. And it is in this landscape that one of the most extraordinary archaeological revelations of the modern era emerges. A site so ancient, so architecturally deliberate, and so conceptually complex that it has fundamentally reshaped our understanding of early human history: Karahan Tepe. At first glance, Karahan Tepe appears unassuming, a low rise in the earth, partially covered by soil and stone, blending into the natural contours of the Harran Plain. But beneath this surface lies something far more profound: a monumental complex of carved stone architecture dating back to the 10th millennium BC, belonging to the same broader cultural horizon as the nearby site of Göbekli Tepe. And yet, Karahan Tepe is different. In some ways, it feels more intimate. In others, more unsettling. Where Göbekli Tepe reveals monumental T-shaped pillars arranged in circular enclosures, Karahan Tepe introduces a more anthropomorphic and immersive world. Here, pillars are not only abstract forms, they begin to resemble human figures. Faces are carved directly into bedrock. Eyes, arms, and torsos emerge from stone that has been shaped with astonishing precision for a time period traditionally associated with mobile hunter-gatherer groups. This alone forces a fundamental question: how did societies without agriculture, metallurgy, or written language construct such complex and symbolically rich environments? Mainstream archaeology places Karahan Tepe within the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a time when human communities were transitioning from nomadic lifestyles to more settled forms of existence. The prevailing interpretation suggests that these monumental enclosures were ritual or ceremonial spaces, perhaps used for communal gatherings, initiation rites, or early forms of religious expression. But even within this framework, Karahan Tepe resists easy categorization, because the site is not simply architectural, it is sculptural. Deep within its excavated chambers, archaeologists have uncovered human-like figures carved directly into bedrock. Some appear seated, others integrated into walls or pillars. One of the most striking discoveries is a series of anthropomorphic forms emerging from the stone itself, as if the rock was not merely shaped, but awakened into representation. Unlike later monumental architecture, which often separates structure from symbolism, Karahan Tepe fuses the two. There is no clear boundary between form and meaning, between object and representation. And this raises a deeper question. Was Karahan Tepe built to represent human figures? Or did it emerge from a worldview in which stone, body, and spirit were not yet fully separated concepts? The so-called T-pillars found across the broader region take on new significance here. At Karahan Tepe, some of these pillars appear more explicitly anthropomorphic than at Göbekli Tepe. Arms are carved into their sides, hands meet at their lower sections, and abstract faces are suggested through subtle reliefs. These are not passive stones. They appear to be active participants in the space they inhabit. Some researchers interpret them as stylized ancestors, deities, or symbolic representations of human identity itself. Others propose they may represent a transitional cognitive phase in human symbolic thinking, a moment when abstraction and embodiment were still merging in early religious expression. But there is no consensus, and perhaps there cannot yet be one, because Karahan Tepe challenges not only archaeological classification, but the very assumptions about cognitive development in early human societies. What kind of social structure was required to organize labor on this scale? What belief system justified carving deep into bedrock with such precision, without clear evidence of domestic settlement nearby? And how were these projects sustained across generations in a period where survival itself would have been uncertain? One of the most intriguing aspects of Karahan Tepe is its apparent lack of residential architecture. Unlike later settlements, there is little evidence here of permanent housing structures. Instead, the site appears to have been dedicated primarily, or even exclusively, to ritual or ceremonial activity. This separation between living space and sacred space suggests a conceptual distinction, that certain places were not meant for daily life, but for interaction with forces or ideas beyond it. But what those forces were remains unknown. Some scholars suggest astronomical alignments may have played a role. The orientation of certain enclosures and carved features appears to correspond loosely with horizon events, seasonal cycles, or celestial movements. However, the evidence is still under analysis, and no definitive astronomical system has been confirmed. Could Karahan Tepe have functioned as a proto-observatory, an early attempt to map the relationship between human existence and the sky above? Or were these alignments incidental, shaped more by landscape and construction logistics than intentional design? Then there are the more speculative interpretations. Some fringe theories propose that Karahan Tepe represents evidence of a lost symbolic system, an early ideological framework that predates known civilizations and may have influenced later cultural developments across the Near East. According to these ideas, sites like Karahan Tepe were not isolated experiments, but part of a broader, now fragmented cultural horizon that extended across ancient Anatolia and into regions such as Mesopotamia and Palestine. While mainstream archaeology does not support these broader claims, The idea persists in alternative interpretations due to the sudden emergence and sophistication of these sites in the archaeological record. There is also the question of intentional burial. Many of Karahan Tepe's structures appear to have been deliberately backfilled in antiquity. Enclosures were filled with stone and debris, sealing them beneath layers of earth for reasons that remain unclear. Was this abandonment, ritual closure, or a cyclical practice in which sacred spaces were periodically sealed and renewed? The act itself suggests meaning beyond practicality. Why construct something so elaborate only to bury it? And what did the builders believe they were preserving, or containing, beneath the surface? Modern excavation is still in its early stages, and only a fraction of Karahan Tepe has been uncovered. Ground-penetrating surveys suggest that much more remains beneath the surface, extending beyond current excavation zones. Each new season reveals additional carvings, chambers, and sculptural elements, gradually expanding the known boundaries of the site. Yet, with every discovery, new uncertainties emerge. Because Karahan Tepe does not behave like a typical archaeological site. It does not progress in a linear narrative from simple to complex. Instead, it appears already fully formed in symbolic depth at its earliest known phase. This raises one of the most profound questions in early human history. Was symbolic complexity a gradual development? Or did it appear suddenly in places like Karahan Tepe, as if emerging from a cognitive threshold we do not yet fully understand? Standing within its excavated enclosures today, surrounded by stone figures that seem both human and something beyond human, there is a sense that interpretation itself is incomplete. The site does not yield its meaning easily. It resists simplification. It invites observation without resolution. And perhaps that is its most important quality. Because Karahan Tepe is not just an archaeological discovery. It is a reminder of how much of early human consciousness remains inaccessible to us, not because it is gone, but because we are still learning how to read it. As the wind moves across the Şanlıurfa Plateau, brushing over stones carved more than 11,000 years ago, one final question remains suspended in the silence. Were the builders of Karahan Tepe simply shaping stone into sacred space? Or were they attempting to express a way of thinking, perceiving, and existing that we have not yet fully learned how to understand? From the silent enclosures of Karahan Tepe, where stone figures emerge from bedrock as if caught between formation and awakening, the narrative of early Anatolia does not settle. It expands. Because even here, in the deep Neolithic past, human expression does not remain confined to a single horizon. It travels. It transforms. And as we move northwest across Anatolia once more, the terrain begins to shift. The vast southeastern plateaus give way to rising highlands, where volcanic formations, pine-covered ridges, and wind-carved valleys define the landscape. The air grows thinner, cooler, and carries with it a different kind of silence. Not the heavy stillness of prehistoric enclosures, but the open, echoing quiet of mountains that seem to remember more than they reveal. In these highlands lies a cultural memory that stretches into antiquity, into myth, and perhaps into something older still, the world of the Phrygians. And within it, traces of what scholars cautiously refer to as the forgotten cult of the Phrygian Highlands. The Phrygian landscape is not immediately dramatic in the way of monumental cities or desert temples. Instead, it is subtle, woven into the contours of central western Anatolia. Yet, hidden among its valleys and cliffs are carved facades, rock sanctuaries, and enigmatic inscriptions that suggest a ritual system deeply embedded in both nature and stone. At the heart of this region stands the ancient site of Phrygian Highlands, a vast cultural landscape rather than a single city. Here, cliffs have been transformed into monumental religious expressions, temple-like facades carved directly into rock faces, niches that may have held sacred objects, and inscriptions in the Phrygian language that still resist complete interpretation. And yet, despite centuries of study, one question persists. What exactly was being worshipped here? The Phrygians flourished during the first millennium BC, roughly between the 12th and 7th centuries BC, emerging after the collapse of earlier Bronze Age civilizations in Anatolia. Classical sources, Greek and later Roman writers, describe them as a people associated with powerful kings, distinctive music, and deep religious devotion. But those same sources are fragmentary, often written from external perspectives, filtered through cultural distance and mythologizing tendencies. What remains on the ground tells a more complex story. Across the Phrygian Highlands, carved rock monuments appear in forms that defy simple categorization. Some resemble monumental doorways that open into solid stone. Others are flat facades engraved with geometric patterns, stepped motifs, and symbolic reliefs. The most famous of these is the so-called Midas Monument, a massive rock-cut structure often associated with the legendary King Midas, not because it contains a burial or inscription confirming his presence, but because later tradition linked the region to his myth. This blending of myth and material culture is central to the mystery, because in the Phrygian world, history and legend are not easily separated. The dominant interpretation among scholars is that these rock-cut monuments were dedicated to a mother goddess figure, often identified as Cybele, a deity associated with fertility, nature, mountains, and wild landscapes. Evidence from inscriptions and later Greco-Roman adaptation supports the idea that Cybele, or her earlier Anatolian forms, played a central role in Phrygian religious life. Yet the archaeological evidence does not present a single, unified cult practice. Instead, it suggests variation, evolution, and ambiguity. Some sanctuaries appear highly formalized, with precise architectural symmetry and repeated symbolic motifs. Others are more isolated, carved into remote cliff faces or hidden within forested valleys, accessible only through difficult terrain. This distribution raises questions. Were these sites part of a centralized religious system, or did they represent localized expressions of a shared spiritual tradition? And why carve sacred spaces directly into living rock? One prevailing interpretation is that the Phrygians viewed the natural landscape itself as inherently divine. Mountains, cliffs, springs, and valleys were not merely settings for worship. They were embodiments of sacred presence. In this view, carving into rock was not an act of construction, but an act of revelation, revealing the divine already present within the earth. But even this interpretation leaves unanswered questions. Because many of the carvings appear to follow strict geometric principles. Some facades are aligned with solar paths or horizon points, suggesting possible astronomical awareness. Others are positioned in ways that frame specific views of the landscape, distant peaks, valleys, or water sources, implying that visual experience itself was part of the ritual design. Was this intentional, or was it a byproduct of selecting naturally significant locations? The so-called cultic inscriptions add another layer of complexity. Written in the Phrygian language, these texts are short, often dedicatory, and frequently formulaic. They reference blessings, offerings, and invocations, but rarely provide detailed narratives. Linguists have made progress in decoding the language, which is Indo-European, but large portions remain uncertain, and so the rituals themselves remain partially obscured. We know offerings were made. We know sacred spaces were maintained. We know certain symbols were repeated across sites. But the full structure of belief, the worldview that tied these elements together, remains elusive. Some scholars suggest that the Phrygian cult system may have been deeply experiential rather than doctrinal. Instead of codified theology, it may have emphasized ritual interaction with the landscape, seasonal ceremonies, and sensory engagement with carved sacred spaces. Music, processions, and trance-like rituals may have played central roles, especially given ancient references to Phrygian musical traditions and instruments such as the flute and lyre. Could the highlands themselves have functioned as a vast ritual environment, where movement through terrain was part of spiritual practice? Or were the monuments designed as fixed points within a broader, unseen ritual geography? Then there is the question of continuity. The Phrygian civilization did not vanish abruptly. It was absorbed gradually into later Hellenistic and Roman cultural systems. Yet many of its religious motifs, particularly those associated with Cybele, persisted for centuries, adapted into new forms while retaining echoes of their earlier meanings. This raises a compelling possibility. Did the forgotten cult truly disappear? Or did it transform, its symbols and practices redistributed across later religious traditions, becoming unrecognizable in their original context but still present in altered form? There are also more speculative interpretations that emerge from the gaps in the record. Some alternative theories propose that the Phrygian rock-cut sanctuaries may encode symbolic systems far older than the civilization itself, possibly inherited from earlier Anatolian or even Neolithic traditions. According to these ideas, the highlands could represent a palimpsest of sacred activity spanning millennia, with successive cultures reusing and reinterpreting earlier ritual landscapes. While mainstream archaeology remains cautious about such claims, the persistence of unusual architectural continuity across long time spans keeps the question open. Because the Phrygian monuments do not feel entirely of one moment. They feel layered, accumulated, as if each generation added meaning without fully erasing what came before. Walking through these highland sanctuaries today, one is struck by the silence of the stone. There are no towering statues, no sprawling cities, only carved surfaces, weathered inscriptions, and the sense of presence embedded in rock. The experience is not one of spectacle, but of contemplation. And perhaps that is intentional. Perhaps the cult, if it can be called that, was never meant to dominate the landscape visually, but to integrate itself into it, dissolving the boundary between nature and ritual, between human action and geological permanence. Yet even this idea remains speculative, because the more we learn about the Phrygian highlands, the more questions seem to emerge rather than resolve. Why did this culture invest so deeply in carved stone rather than built architecture? What rituals took place in these remote sanctuaries? And why do so many of the symbolic patterns resist definitive interpretation, even after centuries of study? As the wind moves across the highlands of Phrygian highlands, brushing over carved facades that have endured more than 2 millennia, the stone seems less like a relic and more like a language still partially unread. And in that silence, between inscription and erosion, between myth and archaeology, one question remains suspended, unresolved and quietly persistent. Was the forgotten cult of the Phrygian highlands truly lost to time, or is it still present in fragments, waiting for us to understand the deeper meaning encoded in the landscape itself? From the rugged highlands of the Phrygian landscape, where carved rock facades and silent sanctuaries whisper the rituals of a forgotten cult, the journey descends gradually into a low, fertile valley, where the contours of civilization begin to emerge in more tangible forms. Here, the land folds into gentle hills, olive groves, and winding rivers, carrying the traces of human occupation that rise from legend into the material world. And it is in this valley that we find a site that bridges myth and archaeology, the imagined and the real: Midas City. At first sight, Midas City presents itself modestly. The sprawling remains of walls, terraces, and monumental gates stretch across a plateau, overlooking the modern city of Yazılıkaya, yet still remote enough to evoke the impression of antiquity untouched. Stones, weathered by centuries, retain the weight of human endeavor, while the horizon beyond suggests a landscape that once shaped kings, armies, and priests alike. It is a place that speaks not only of construction, but of intention, an urban canvas etched by a culture whose symbols and meanings are only partially known. This city, often associated with the legendary King Midas, flourished during the 8th and 7th centuries BC, a period when the Phrygians dominated central Anatolia. Historical accounts, particularly from Greek historians, present Midas as a figure of both power and myth, most famously linked to the Golden Touch. But the archaeological site offers a more tangible lens into the life and society that might have given rise to such stories. Walls rise in carefully laid stone, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of defensive architecture, while terraced constructions indicate complex social organization and urban planning. Yet, despite these visible structures, the city maintains an enigmatic presence. The true nature of its social, religious, and political life remains elusive. Walking through Midas City today, one is struck by the alignment of its monumental gates and citadel walls. Scholars have long noted the city's orientation, positioned strategically to oversee the surrounding valley while incorporating the natural topography into its design. Was this purely a defensive measure, or did it serve ritual purposes as well? Some researchers suggest that key gates align with solar events or topographical markers, hinting at a symbolic dimension in urban planning that might have tied political authority to cosmic cycles. In other words, the city itself could have been a stage for both earthly and spiritual power. Archaeologists have uncovered inscriptions in the Phrygian language carved into stone blocks, dedicatory phrases that speak of rulers, deities, and communal offerings. Yet the inscriptions remain cryptic, fragmentary, and often repetitive, leaving questions about the intricacies of governance, law, and religious practice unanswered. What do these texts reveal about the interaction between king, priest, and citizen? Was Midas City a purely administrative center, a ritual hub, or something in between? Each stone seems to promise answers while withholding them. Among the most compelling features of Midas City are its monumental rock-cut tombs and funerary complexes. These tombs are not merely repositories for the dead, they are statements in stone, blending architectural sophistication with symbolic expression. Some feature carved reliefs of animals, deities, or geometric motifs, echoing the iconography seen across the Phrygian Highlands. Their scale suggests powerful patrons and the presence of a social elite capable of mobilizing labor and resources for grand construction projects. Yet, despite their ostentation, the tombs raise questions about beliefs surrounding death, the afterlife, and the relationship between the living and the dead. Did these tombs serve as protective shrines for royal spirits, or were they markers of civic identity meant to impress and intimidate? Then there is the matter of material wealth. Greek historians describe Midas as a king of immense riches, whose legendary golden touch became symbolic of abundance itself. Archaeologists have discovered traces of wealth, gold ornaments, jewelry, and imported artifacts, but the evidence is sparse and fragmented. Was Phrygian society genuinely as affluent as the myths suggest, or were these stories exaggerations designed to awe distant chroniclers? Could the gold be symbolic, representing spiritual or ritual value rather than economic accumulation? Even more intriguing are the anomalies within the city's layout. Certain terraces, chambers, and ceremonial spaces do not correspond neatly to defensive or domestic functions. Some researchers propose these were ritual areas, possibly linked to the Phrygian cult of Cybele or other deities. Others speculate on the presence of initiation spaces or secretive priestly quarters, places where esoteric knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations. Yet no definitive evidence identifies the precise purpose of these structures, leaving room for interpretation and speculation. There are also indications of interaction with other cultures. The Phrygians were not isolated. Trade, diplomacy, and conflict connected them to neighboring regions, including Lydia, the Hittite remnants, and beyond. Pottery styles, metallurgical techniques, and imported luxury items suggest a network of exchange, yet much of it remains partially understood. Did Midas City serve as a central hub within this network, projecting Phrygian power and ideology across Anatolia, or was it primarily inward-facing, a ceremonial capital for local elites? The evidence hints at both possibilities, weaving a complex web of cultural and political influence. Furthermore, Midas City presents us with a puzzle of continuity and transformation. Many of its monuments were later repurposed or adapted in the Hellenistic and Roman periods, blending earlier Phrygian forms with new architectural and symbolic motifs. This continuity raises fascinating questions. How did later societies interpret Phrygian space and iconography? Did they recognize the original meanings, or were these forms assimilated into entirely new narratives? In this way, Midas City becomes not just an archaeological site, but a palimpsest of cultural memory, layered with successive interpretations, erasures, and reinventions. Even now, new excavations continue to reveal unexpected features, hidden chambers, carved reliefs, and construction techniques that challenge conventional assumptions about urban planning in the early Iron Age. Each discovery invites deeper reflection on the capabilities, beliefs, and ambitions of the Phrygian people. How did a society without widespread literacy, currency-based economy, or formalized bureaucracy construct a city that remains, millennia later, a testament to architectural ingenuity and symbolic depth? And yet, for all the answers unearthed, Midas City continues to resist full understanding. Its monumental gates, terraced structures, tombs, and inscriptions form a language that we can glimpse but not fully read, a story partially written in stone, sunlight, and landscape. It is a city that exists both as history and as myth, tangible and ephemeral, material and symbolic. Standing on the plateau overlooking the ancient ruins, with the highlands rising behind and the valley stretching toward distant horizons, one is struck by the sense of enduring mystery. Midas City does not yield its secrets lightly. It invites careful observation, patient contemplation, and humility in the face of human ingenuity and imagination. And as the wind sweeps across the terraces, brushing over the stones carved in honor of kings, deities, and ancestors, one question lingers as persistently as it has for millennia. Was Midas City merely a political capital of a powerful kingdom, or was it the crystallization of a spiritual vision, a city designed to embody the relationship between humans, the divine, and the cosmos in ways that we have only begun to perceive? From the ancient terraces of Midas City, where myth and history entwine in weathered stone, our journey continues southward into the fertile plains of western Anatolia. Here, the landscape shifts from highland ruggedness to a mosaic of rolling hills and river valleys, where the remnants of civilizations long past whisper their stories amid the whispering olive groves and scattered ruins. Nestled along the banks of the Lycus River lies a city that, for centuries, has been both a center of commerce and a mystery: Laodicea. Laodicea rises from the earth with the quiet authority of antiquity. Its ruins stretch across a broad expanse, punctuated by monumental gates, stone-paved streets, and the skeletal remains of theaters, baths, and temples. Despite the ravages of time, the city's layout hints at careful planning and a once thriving urban life. Columns still stand like sentinels, and the shadows they cast suggest a society that valued both aesthetics and order. Walking through the remnants of Laodicea, one can almost hear the murmurs of its citizens, the bustle of merchants, and the rituals of priests attending to deities whose names now echo faintly in history. Founded in the Hellenistic period, Laodicea gained prominence under the Seleucid dynasty and later became a key city in the Roman province of Asia. Its strategic position along trade routes connecting the interior of Anatolia to the Aegean coast ensured both wealth and exposure to cultural influences from across the Mediterranean. Coins, inscriptions, and monumental architecture attest to a city that flourished economically and politically. Yet, as with Midas City, Laodicea presents questions that defy straightforward answers. What drove its prosperity? Was it solely trade, or did hidden currents of spiritual significance play a role in shaping the city's trajectory? One of Laodicea's most intriguing aspects is its advanced infrastructure. Archaeologists have uncovered an intricate water management system, including aqueducts, cisterns, and sophisticated plumbing that supplied both public baths and private residences. Some of these aqueducts carried water from distant springs, a testament to the ingenuity of its engineers. Yet beneath this rational, practical design lies a potential layer of symbolism. Could the careful control of water, an essential, life-giving element, also reflect ritual or religious considerations? In many ancient cultures, water was not only practical but sacred, a bridge between mortal and divine. Laodicea's engineers may have built more than a city. They may have encoded in stone and water a philosophy of balance and order, a reflection of cosmological principles now lost to us. The city's religious landscape further deepens the mystery. Temples dedicated to Zeus, Artemis, and other deities reveal the interplay of Hellenistic and Roman religious practices. Yet inscriptions and dedications also suggest local cults, some of which remain poorly understood. Were these merely extensions of imported belief systems, or did Laodicea nurture unique rituals that fused local and foreign traditions? The answers lie in fragments of stone, worn inscriptions, and scattered artifacts, each offering tantalizing glimpses into a spiritual life that remains elusive. Commerce and craftsmanship left equally compelling traces. Laodicea was renowned for its textiles, particularly a black wool known as Laodicean cloth, which was highly prized throughout the region. Merchants trafficked in linen, leather, and luxury goods, creating a web of economic connections that reached far beyond Anatolia. Yet, alongside this material wealth, some objects hint at ritualistic or symbolic purposes. Intricately carved jewelry, ceremonial figurines, and unusual inscriptions. Could the city's wealth have been intertwined with its spiritual identity, suggesting a society where commerce and belief were inseparable? Another layer of Laodicea's intrigue emerges in the urban design of its public spaces. The city's theaters and agoras were not merely venues for entertainment or trade. They were stages where social and political life intertwined with performance, ritual, and perhaps subtle power dynamics. Scholars have noted the alignment of certain structures with topographical features, leading to speculation that celestial events or seasonal cycles influenced the city's planning. Was this alignment intentional? A reflection of cosmological understanding embedded in the very fabric of Laodicea? Or are these correlations coincidental, a reminder of the human tendency to seek patterns even in the ancient and the ruined? Burial practices in Laodicea provide another enigma. Tombs and funerary monuments, ranging from simple sarcophagi to elaborate rock-cut chambers, reveal both wealth and reverence for the dead. Some tombs display inscriptions indicating familial lineage or civic status, while others bear symbols whose meanings remain uncertain. Did Laodicea's citizens perceive death merely as an end, or did they envision complex interactions between the living and the afterlife, with the city itself serving as a bridge between worlds? The scarcity of complete texts leaves room for speculation, and the gaps in knowledge create a space where imagination and evidence converge. In addition to architecture, inscriptions, and artifacts, Laodicea offers hints of mysteries that defy material explanation. Ancient chroniclers allude to hidden treasures and secret chambers, stories of knowledge or wealth concealed beneath the city's streets. Modern excavations have revealed previously unknown substructures and tunnels, yet the full extent of what lies beneath remains uncertain. Are these subterranean spaces purely practical, storage, water channels, or defensive refuges? Or could they have held ritual significance, spaces where esoteric knowledge was preserved from the eyes of ordinary citizens? Some historians suggest that these hidden areas were linked to initiation rites, elite cultic practices, or even proto-mystery religions whose traces have vanished into antiquity. Equally compelling are reports of Laodicea's fate. Earthquakes and invasions reshaped the city over centuries, leaving layers of destruction and reconstruction. Roman and Byzantine modifications overlaid Hellenistic foundations, creating a palimpsest of civilizations. Yet, despite these disruptions, the city retains an aura of coherence, as if each successive generation respected the underlying vision of its founders. How did such continuity persist, and what knowledge or tradition allowed later societies to adapt ancient structures without erasing them completely? Laodicea also invites reflection on the intangible, the cultural memory embedded in place, the resonance of myths, and the ways humans interact with landscape and architecture across generations. Could there have been hidden principles of urban design, spiritual symbolism, or civic identity encoded in ways that modern archaeologists only partially perceive? Might the city's orientation, its use of water, the layout of tombs, and the positioning of public buildings reflect a worldview now lost to history? And then there are questions raised by gaps in evidence. What do we not know because evidence was never created, was destroyed, or remains buried? How much of Laodicea's story is irretrievably lost, and how much waits patiently beneath the soil, awaiting discovery? Each excavation reveals both answers and new mysteries, reminding us that history is rarely linear and often resistant to full comprehension. Standing amid the remnants of Laodicea today, one feels a profound sense of human ingenuity and impermanence. The city's stones, once vibrant with commerce, debate, and ritual, now lie silent, yet they speak across the millennia, hinting at knowledge, belief, and ambition. The interplay between the visible and the hidden, the known and the unknowable, gives the city a haunting quality, an invitation to consider what human societies can achieve and what remains beyond our understanding. Laodicea, like Midas City before it, embodies a tension between myth and reality, wealth and mystery, the sacred and the mundane. Its ruins remind us that cities are not merely collections of stones, but living reflections of the people, ideas, and forces that shaped them. Every gate, every column, every fragmented inscription is a thread in a tapestry whose pattern we glimpse only partially, and whose full design may forever elude us. And so, as the Lycus River flows quietly past the city's ruins, carrying with it centuries of memory, we are left with a question that transcends time. Was Laodicea merely a prosperous commercial hub, or did it serve as a sacred stage upon which human ambition, divine observation, and cosmic order intersected in ways that remain hidden to this day? What secrets lie buried beneath its streets, its foundations, and its stones? Secrets that might yet reveal the full scope of a city that thrived at the crossroads of history, myth, and mystery. From the fertile plains of Laodicea, where river and ruin intertwine, our journey follows the contours of Anatolia's southern reaches, descending toward the sun-warmed coast of Pamphylia. Here, the land opens into a mosaic of wheat fields, olive groves, and scattered cedar trees, revealing the faint traces of a city that once rivaled the great urban centers of antiquity. It is here, along a broad alluvial plain near the modern city of Antalya, that Perge emerges from the earth, a city whose stones still whisper secrets of grandeur, ritual, and mystery. Approaching Perge, one is immediately struck by its monumental entrance, a pair of grand arches, their surfaces worn smooth by wind, rain, and the tread of countless feet over millennia. Through this gateway, a colonnaded street stretches in a near-perfect line, flanked by remnants of once opulent buildings. The avenue itself seems almost to hum with echoes of ancient life, processions of citizens, merchants calling their wares, and priests attending to sacred duties. Here, as in Laodicea, one senses that the city was not merely functional. It was symbolic, designed to impress and to instruct, to convey order, hierarchy, and perhaps even cosmic meaning. Perge's origins are lost in the shadows of prehistory, though archaeological evidence suggests settlement here as early as the Bronze Age. By the first millennium BC, the city had become a thriving Pamphylian center, and later, under Greek and Roman influence, it flourished as a hub of culture, commerce, and politics. Coins and inscriptions indicate a civic pride and administrative sophistication. Theaters, stadiums, and baths reveal an appetite for leisure and spectacle. Yet, beyond these conventional markers of civilization, Perge retains enigmas that defy easy interpretation, inviting speculation about what truly drove its prosperity and cultural vibrancy. Water, as in Laodicea, plays a central role in understanding Perge. A complex network of aqueducts and reservoirs brought life-giving water into the city, enabling baths, fountains, and agricultural irrigation. The engineering is precise, yet some scholars suggest it may have carried symbolic significance beyond mere utility. Water in antiquity was often associated with purification, renewal, and divine favor. Could Perge's aqueducts have served not only as a practical lifeline, but also as a conduit for spiritual or ceremonial purposes? Did the city's planners align channels, fountains, and baths with sacred sites, seasonal patterns, or celestial events, creating an urban environment imbued with layered meaning? Perge's theaters and stadiums offer further layers of intrigue. The large Roman theater, carved meticulously into the landscape, could accommodate thousands of spectators, yet its acoustics and spatial orientation suggest more than entertainment. They hint at ceremonial and civic orchestration. Festivals, religious processions, or political assemblies may have been carefully choreographed to evoke awe, reinforce societal hierarchies, or connect citizens to forces perceived as beyond human comprehension. Was the theater merely an arena of performance, or did it serve as a stage where civic, spiritual, and cosmic order converged? Such questions persist, unanswerable but compelling, as we walk among the crumbling steps and columns. Religious life in Perge remains a captivating puzzle. Temples to Artemis, Zeus, and other pantheon figures reveal the integration of Greek, Roman, and local beliefs. Inscriptions and dedications hint at cultic practices that have left few traces, but suggest a spiritual depth that may have guided civic and personal life. Some scholars propose that hidden rites or mystery traditions could have taken place in secluded chambers beneath or behind the city's visible monuments. Could there have been knowledge deliberately concealed from the uninitiated, a wisdom entwined with ritual, architecture, and the flow of water through the city? The city's necropolis, sprawling along the edges of the urban core, adds an additional dimension to Perge's mysteries. Tombs range from modest stone markers to elaborate sarcophagi, some adorned with carvings and inscriptions of striking elegance. These burial sites offer tantalizing glimpses into social hierarchies, family structures, and perhaps beliefs about the afterlife. Yet the variation and occasional obscurity of these monuments invite speculation. Were some tombs intended to convey status, others spiritual potency, and others still, coded messages whose meaning has slipped from memory? Among these stones, one senses an awareness of mortality intertwined with civic identity, a reflection of a society both practical and contemplative, material and metaphysical. Artifacts uncovered in Perge contribute to both clarity and mystery. Coins, pottery, and inscriptions testify to trade and governance, yet certain objects, figurines, ritual implements, and symbolic carvings, resist full explanation. Some bear motifs reminiscent of distant lands, suggesting connections with cultures as far afield as the eastern Mediterranean or even beyond. Were these mere markers of commerce, or did they encode ideas, beliefs, or ceremonial functions now lost to us? The possibility that Perge served as a node of not just trade but knowledge, esoteric practices, or spiritual exchange remains an open and tantalizing question. Perge's urban planning further suggests intentionality beyond functionality. Streets, gates, and public buildings align with remarkable precision, hinting at an underlying logic, perhaps practical, perhaps symbolic. Some researchers speculate that the city's geometry, its axial alignments, and the placement of sacred spaces may have mirrored cosmological or astronomical considerations, echoing a broader pattern observed in contemporary cities across Anatolia. Could the builders of Perge have embedded in the city a microcosm of their universe, a tangible map of principles invisible yet perceptible to those attuned to them? Or are these alignments coincidental, artifacts of geography and convenience? The question lingers, unresolved. Even natural forces have contributed to Perge's aura of mystery. Earthquakes and floods reshaped the city across centuries, creating layers of destruction and reconstruction that complicate interpretation. Yet, through this turbulence, patterns endure, an enduring testament to resilience, ingenuity, and perhaps a reverence for inherited knowledge. How did successive generations adapt without erasing the essence of the city's original vision? And what, if anything, might lie beneath the streets, chambers, and foundations yet to be uncovered? Standing today in the colonnaded avenues of Perge, one senses the interplay of permanence and impermanence. Marble columns lean at impossible angles, inscriptions are worn nearly beyond recognition, and yet the city's structure still conveys an almost palpable order. There is an artistry in its ruins, a dialogue between the builder's intention and the passage of time. Every step across its stones, every glance at its fountains or temples, evokes questions about how ancient people understood the world and their place within it. Were they guided by gods, by cosmology, or by a profound intuition about life, death, and society? Perhaps all three. And then there is the subtle, ineffable quality that resists categorization. Perge is at once familiar, classical, orderly, comprehensible, and yet profoundly strange. Hidden tunnels, lost inscriptions, and elusive symbols suggest that the city may still harbor secrets. Could there be chambers yet unexcavated, messages yet unread, rituals yet unimagined? Did the people of Perge perceive realities beyond those we can reconstruct today? Glimpses of a dimension where the human, the divine, and the cosmic converged? Perge, like Laodicea and Midas City before it, embodies this tension between the known and the unknown, the tangible and the invisible. Its streets and monuments speak to achievement, culture, and ambition, yet they also provoke wonder, inviting us to consider what lies beyond the limits of modern understanding. Every stone, column, and inscription is a thread in a narrative that is both partially revealed and intentionally obscured, a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring mystery of history. And so, as the sun sets across the Lycus plain, casting long shadows over the city's ancient streets, we are left to ponder the unanswered questions. Was Perge merely a prosperous urban center, or did it serve as a hidden stage for knowledge, ritual, and cosmic observation? What secrets linger beneath its foundations, waiting for discovery, interpretation, or perhaps understanding that transcends the material record? In contemplating Perge, we confront the limits of history, archaeology, and imagination, and yet we cannot help but wonder what truths remain hidden, lingering silently beneath the stones of this remarkable city.